Our story begins in the exam hall, where Jiang Xiaoyu intentionally aced the bonus questions just to distance himself from the school beauty, Lu Rian. As they left, Rian's friends mocked Xiaoyu, while Rian herself claimed she had failed the test and demanded he take action. She told him to turn in a blank paper this afternoon, or he'd lose his chance to serve her, a command followed by a burst of collective laughter. Looking at Rian's disgusted expression, Xiaoyu simply nodded and said he understood, though his inner thoughts were far different. He decided then and there that anyone else could be her lapdog, but he was finished. He immediately called his butler. He ordered an end to all financial aid for her family and had them evicted, leaving Rian absolutely frantic with rage. She called him 99 times, but he didn't pick up once. She was desperate now, though it was far too late for that. In his past life, as the son of the richest man, he had pathetically knelt before the daughter of his family's driver just to marry her. He had even handed over his father's company to her, only for her to spend his money while falling in love with someone else. She treated her boyfriend like a spoiled prince, while Xiaoyu was reduced to a mere servant. On her wedding day, he called her for help. He needed money for medical treatment, but she cruelly told him that the years he spent clinging to her were nothing but a nightmare. She told him to just go ahead and die. Yet, in his final moments, he saw a woman holding him and finally realized the truth. The wealthy socialite he had once rejected had actually been waiting for him all along, and then, he opened his eyes once more. He found himself back in his senior year of high school, napping at his desk until the treacherous Rian woke him up. She told him that Lu Jinyan's stomach was hurting and ordered him to go buy medicine and fetch a lunch with extra meat from the cafeteria. She claimed Jinyan was too thin and needed nourishment, while Jinyan herself sat surrounded by a crowd of adoring classmates. Everyone was fussing over Jinyan's stomach ache, but the one most concerned was, naturally, her close friend Rian. The two of them were always the top students, seen by everyone as a perfect, golden pair, the ideal match, so to speak. Meanwhile, Xiaoyu had been nothing but Rian's mindless lapdog, sleeping through class only to spend his breaks running her errands. Realizing he had been reborn, he looked at Rian's demanding face and found it utterly ridiculous. Who did she think she was, anyway? Seeing him just standing there, Lu Rian spoke up, asking why he was dazed and telling him to hurry back. Yes, of course. She then walked over to Lu Jinyan and gently patted her back, while Jinyan stole a quick glance at Xiaoyu. Jinyan suggested it wasn't right to send Xiaoyu, but Rian scoffed, claiming he actually enjoyed doing these sorts of things. She even joked that he'd be unhappy if she didn't let him serve, looking at him for confirmation as he forced a smile. Without a word, he headed to the cafeteria and lined up for 2 meals, drawing soft, mocking laughter from the nearby students. They teased him for fetching food again, noting that Rian preferred someone elite like Jinyan and would never look at him. When he questioned what they meant, they called him a servant's son who only fantasized about the young mistress because they shared a commute. They told him to wake up, claiming a useless boy like him was destined to remain a servant for her family forever. They even joked about him washing her clothes and changing her son's diapers, which made Xiaoyu laugh with a touch of bitterness. He wondered if Rian had really told them he was a servant's son when he only let her use his car out of affection. It was ironic. In the eyes of others, Rian had become the wealthy lady while he was reduced to the help. When he asked about this, the other student simply rolled his eyes, as if the answer were perfectly obvious. The boy told him to hurry up and deliver the mistress her lunch before it was too late, laughing all the while. Everyone around them joined in, mocking his pathetic devotion and his delusions, just as the school bell began to ring. Leaving the cafeteria, he didn't return to class. Instead, he sat by the flower bed and ate both meals himself. He couldn't even remember the last time he'd had a proper meal, having been too poor to afford anything decent. In his past life, he had spent his time scavenging for leftover scraps at the market after closing time. Meat had been a luxury he couldn't even dream of, and only after finishing both portions did his hunger finally subside. By the time he returned to the classroom, the first bell had already rung, and an angry Rian demanded to know where he'd been. She snapped at him, asking for the medicine, but he only looked at her coldly, his usual warmth completely gone. Lu Rian stared at him, speechless, before demanding to know where the stomach medicine for Lu Jingyan was. She had told him Jingyan wasn't feeling well. She snapped, asking if he was deaf and why he couldn't handle such a small task. Xiaoyu glanced at the pale-faced Jingyan, feeling nothing but cold indifference. He asked her what his relationship with Jingyan even was, and why on earth he should be the one buying him medicine. To be honest, it was a fair question. Jingyan came from a modest background, but ever since meeting Rian, she had treated him exceptionally well. Whenever Xiaoyu's father gave him something nice, Rian would simply take it. She would give those gifts to Jingyan. Even the watch on Jingyan's wrist right now actually belonged to Xiaoyu. These two were living off his resources. They swiped his cards, used his money, and enjoyed everything he had, yet they treated him like a common servant. It was an absurd dynamic, really. Rian told Jiang Xiaoyu that if he wanted to make a scene, he shouldn't blame her for ignoring him next time. She warned him not to come crawling back. She told him he'd eventually be begging for her forgiveness. Xiaoyu stared at her, finding the sheer audacity of her words almost laughable. He wondered what he could possibly need her forgiveness for, or what he had even done wrong. Seeing him actually talk back to Rian, the other students began to watch. They whispered, wondering how this lapdog had suddenly grown a spine. Rian herself was momentarily stunned by his defiance. She looked at him, likely remembering all the times he had come to plead with her. She then declared that he shouldn't bother going home with her that afternoon. Xiaoyu simply nodded and said fine as he walked to his seat and sat down. He acted as if he hadn't even processed her threat as a punishment. Deep down, he was relieved. However, Jing Yan's seatmate, Wang Yan, decided this was the perfect moment to stand up and demand justice. She confronted Xiaoyu, asking what his problem was and why he couldn't do something as simple as buying a bit of medicine. She pointed out that Jing Yan was clearly unwell, but Xiaoyu only gave her a cold, sweeping glance. He suggested that if she was so concerned, she should go buy it herself. Wang Yan, acting completely righteous, argued that this was his job and his responsibility. Why should she be the one to go? Xiaoyu countered by asking why he, who had no relation to Jing Yan, should be responsible. Wang Yan pointed a finger at him in disbelief. She called him a joke, claiming that as a servant in Rian's house, it was only natural for him to buy medicine for Rian's friend. Hearing this, Xiaoyu turned his gaze toward Rian. He asked her directly if she was the one telling everyone that he was just a servant in her home. He locked eyes with her, and for a brief moment, Rian looked genuinely guilty. Of course, that was just how others perceived the situation. She arrived every day in a luxury car, and while others speculated about her status, she simply never bothered to correct them. She would never admit that her father was merely a driver and that she was the daughter of Xiaoyu's family chauffeur. Rian assumed he was just jealous and didn't want to buy medicine for Jingyan. To her, this behavior seemed perfectly normal. She glanced at him and asked where the food was, assuming that even if he forgot the medicine, he must have bought lunch. She had heard from other students that he bought 2 meals, but Xiaoyu calmly told her that he had already eaten them. Rian was visibly agitated, unable to believe he had eaten both portions, but Xiaoyu simply nodded in confirmation. The students sitting nearby looked at him with pure disdain, mockingly asking if he was a pig for eating 2 full meals. They were used to flattering Rian and looking down on him. Previously, he had endured their insults just to keep her happy. He used to hope they would speak well of him, but now he realized he had simply been spoiling them for far too long. Ironically, every time Rian treated them to a meal, she was actually spending his money. It was his wealth they were enjoying. He told them that since it was his own money, he had every right to eat 20 meals if he felt like it. The students' faces darkened, and one whispered that his money surely came from Rian's family anyway. The irony was palpable. Xiaoyu didn't even bother to explain, but Rian was becoming increasingly furious, especially since she now had nothing to eat. Her anger finally boiled over. She looked at Jiang Xiaoyu and told him that he had brought this entirely on himself. She told him she hoped he could maintain this act for at least 2 days before he came crawling back to her. She stood up, grabbed her belongings, and told Jing Yan's seatmate, Wang Yan, that they were switching places immediately. This was her standard punishment whenever she was displeased, refusing to sit with him. It was a classic move, really. He had originally begged for this arrangement, as she was technically his tutor and was supposed to help him study. Looking back, he realized she had never actually taught him anything. She had only used the time to order him around. She seemed to think this threat would intimidate him, but he ignored her completely. Rian was hungry, and Jingyan was still unwell. Because her stomach was still bothering her, she sat there with a dark expression, glancing over at Xiaoyu by the window. Rian was truly furious this time, telling herself that when he finally came to apologize, she would make him regret everything. Later that afternoon, when school let out, the family Maybach was waiting at the entrance as usual. Xiaoyu walked straight toward it. By now, the entire school knew he had offended Rian, and everyone was gathered around, waiting to enjoy his downfall. Seeing him have the audacity to approach the car, they began pointing and whispering, mocking him for his perceived shamelessness. They wondered how he could keep freeloading off her family's car. To them, he was just a servant's son acting like a master. Rian hadn't even arrived yet, and they marveled at his nerve. They felt she was far too kind to someone so arrogant. In their eyes, a lowly son of a commoner should have been expelled long ago. Xiaoyu, however, simply ignored their taunts. Once he was settled inside the car, we see him give a direct order to the driver to start the engine immediately. The driver hesitated, noting that the young lady hadn't arrived yet. Sometimes Rian was late due to her student council duties. Usually, Xiaoyu would wait as long as it took, so the driver was surprised by this sudden demand to leave without her. Seeing the driver ignore his command to speak up for Rian, Xiaoyu found the entire situation rather absurd. He reminded Uncle Lu that his father only had one child, himself. There was no young lady in their household. Uncle Lu assumed they had just had a lover's quarrel, promising the young master that he would scold his daughter later. Xiaoyu told him not to bother. He simply didn't want to travel with her or see her ever again. Uncle Lu hesitated, still not following the order. He was far too used to seeing Xiaoyu act terrified of his daughter. He remembered how Xiaoyu never dared to argue with Rian. He assumed there would be no real consequences for ignoring the boy. Thinking that his daughter would eventually inherit the family fortune through marriage, the driver had stopped acting like a servant. He was already putting on the airs of a future father-in-law. Xiaoyu frowned, asking him one last time if he was going to drive. In reality, Xiaoyu's father had wanted to fire him long ago after hearing rumors of the man's secret gambling habits. Keeping such a person in the house was a risk, but at the time, Xiaoyu's judgment was clouded, and he constantly spoke up for her. He had hoped that by helping Rian stay, she could remain at the Jiang estate, so he told his father many kind lies about her. He even claimed she treated him exceptionally well, which is the only reason the driver still had a job. Now, however, the man wouldn't even listen to his master. And here they are. Seeing Rian appear at the school gates, Uncle Lu quickly hopped out of the car to greet her. Rian arrived supporting Lu Jingyan, and as they reached the vehicle, Uncle Lu dutifully opened the door for them. Rian prepared to help Jingyan inside. In the past, because Xiaoyu liked her so much, he had always insisted they all travel home together. Every single day, the driver would drop Jingyan off first before finally taking Xiaoyu back to the Jiang residence. Not only that, but Xiaoyu used to wake up early just to pick Jingyan up. But today, before Jingyan could step inside, Xiaoyu spoke up. He asked why she was trying to get in, reminding her she said she wouldn't be going back with him. The surrounding students were shocked. They began cursing Xiaoyu, wondering what was wrong with him. To them, this was clearly Rian's car, and they hated his arrogant attitude. They felt Rian was being generous just by letting him ride along, and they couldn't believe he was now trying to bar the young lady from her own car. As the crowd whispered, Rian's expression stiffened. She couldn't understand why Xiaoyu was acting so strangely today. She asked if he really had to be this way, claiming she had already decided to forgive him for his behavior at lunch. She warned him not to keep making a scene, but Xiaoyu simply replied that he didn't need her forgiveness and told her to find her own way home. Rian's face turned pale, then flushed with anger. She was well aware that everyone viewed her as the wealthy heiress in this scenario. If she didn't get into this car now, her carefully crafted identity as a rich socialite would be completely exposed. Losing her patience, she reached out and physically pulled Xiaoyu out of the car, allowing Jingyan to take the seat instead. Xiaoyu told her she was crossing a line. To be honest, he was genuinely furious at her audacity. He couldn't even remember why he had tolerated her for so long. Looking at her true face now, he wondered how he ever thought she was kind. Rian ignored him entirely, clearly having no intention of being reasonable as she continued her overbearing display. And then, the unthinkable happened. Uncle Lu actually drove away, leaving Xiaoyu standing there while the crowd watched in silence. The onlookers, seeing this scene, couldn't help but burst into laughter, thinking he finally got what he deserved for being so unreasonable. Left alone, Xiaoyu pulled out his phone, a cheap, old Nokia worth only a few hundred yuan that Rian had bought for herself. To please her back then, he had given her the expensive smartphone his father bought for his birthday, taking this junk phone in exchange. At the time, he thought this would protect her pride, but looking at the broken device now, he found the whole memory rather ridiculous. Still, he used it to call his father, and moments later, the Maybach that had just left came driving right back to the gate. Uncle Lu stepped out of the car with a pale face, looking quite troubled as he approached the young master. It was obvious the driver had just been scolded. Xiaoyu simply told him to get those two out, as he wouldn't share a ride with them. Uncle Lu turned to the passengers, and Rian was forced to help Jingyan out of the car, much to Jingyan's utter surprise. Watching Xiaoyu, Jingyan's face turned several shades of white as he complained that Xiaoyu didn't need to target Rian like this. He insisted Rian had always been good to him, but Rian quickly stopped him, telling him not to waste his breath. Once the two of them were finally out, Xiaoyu climbed into the car and rolled down the window with a calm smile. He waved a cheerful goodbye to Rian as they pulled away. Watching through the mirror, Uncle Lu was stunned by how cold Xiaoyu had become. The driver couldn't help but speak up, suggesting that while arguments are normal, perhaps the young master shouldn't be so angry. He promised to make Rian apologize later, trying to smooth things over for his daughter's sake. To be honest, his bias was showing. He worried that without the car, Rian would be forced to take the bus and wouldn't make it home until very late. Xiaoyu dryly pointed out that if everyone else can take the bus, so can she, before asking Uncle Lu who exactly pays his salary. He suggested that if the driver didn't like his orders, he was free to resign. Imagine the audacity of a servant trying to lecture his employer. Terrified by the threat to his job, Uncle Lu immediately shut his mouth. A little later, they finally arrived back at the estate. Upon his return, the housekeeper, Aunt Zhou, looked at him in confusion, wondering why the young master had returned without Miss Rian. Xiaoyu told her that Rian was no longer part of the family, leaving Aunt Zhou standing there in complete shock. She couldn't believe the young master had finally come to his senses after being so blinded by his feelings for Rian. The Lu family had forgotten their place long ago, and though Aunt Zhou wanted to speak up, she never dared to. Hearing Xiaoyu's words now, she felt deeply moved. She looked at him, realizing things were finally changing in this house. Among the staff, she had always been the kindest to him, yet he used to resent her for criticizing Rian's behavior. In his past life, Rian had fired Aunt Zhou the moment she took control. Remembering this, Xiaoyu felt a pang of guilt. His eyes grew misty as he looked at her. He told her he was going upstairs, but she mentioned a visitor had arrived. Miss Bai Ningbin was here, and Aunt Zhou had been about to send her away as usual. Ningbin visited the estate quite often. Because his father had arranged their match, Xiaoyu used to despise her, being completely obsessed with Rian at the time. He used to refuse to even see her, having her turned away at the door. Consequently, they had barely ever met. Yet, he remembered that in his final moments, it was her people who took him to the hospital when no one else cared. She had still considered herself his fiancée even then. He stopped Aunt Zhou, asking where Ningbin was. She was in the backyard. We find her there, playing with Dabai. As Xiaoyu approached, he saw Ningbin gently feeding the large dog. Dabai was a dog he had always wanted, but he had distanced himself from the pet just because Rian disliked animals. It was a surprise to see Ningbin getting along so well with Dabai. He recalled hearing that she had stayed single for years. Despite her beauty and status, she never married. His eyes reddened at the thought. Ningbin finished petting the dog and looked up. Seeing him standing in the doorway, she wasn't sure how long he'd been watching. She started to approach, then hesitated. Remembering how much he usually disliked her, she stopped in her tracks and simply addressed him as young Master Jiang. Ningbin was striking but possessed a calm, steady maturity that made her seem much older than her actual years. She was a top-tier student, the very person Rian envied most. Rian always complained that Ningbin's life was far too perfect. Rian always claimed she'd be just as successful if she had his resources, insisting his excellence was merely a product of his family's wealth. Every time she saw Ningbin's high grades, she felt a wave of resentment, an insecurity that Xiaoyu, unfortunately, had adopted as his own. He had spent years treating Ningbin like an enemy, yet looking back, they had never actually had a single meaningful interaction. The poor girl had never actually done anything to him. This time, Xiaoyu managed to keep his emotions in check and simply asked if she needed something. She replied that she just wanted to see him. When he didn't immediately respond, Ningbin, sensing she wasn't wanted as usual, began to withdraw. She told him she knew he didn't want to see her and would leave immediately. To be honest, she hadn't even expected to get past the front door. She had really just come to visit Dabai, so the fact that Xiaoyu was even speaking to her felt like a massive victory. Seeing her turn to leave, Xiaoyu spoke up and asked if she would like to stay for dinner. It was a simple gesture, but a shocking one. Ningbin froze, looking at him in complete disbelief as she asked if he was serious. At that moment, the setting sun cast a warm glow over him. The light gave him a sudden, approachable kindness. He assured her she could stay, knowing Rian wouldn't be back yet since she was busy with Lu Jingyan. In the past, he would have insisted on waiting for Rian before anyone could touch a single plate of food, but those days were over. Aunt Zhou was surprised to see him wanting to eat so early and asked if they should wait for Miss Lu. He simply asked why they would bother. The staff had grown so used to him acting like Rian's personal servant that his sudden change in attitude was quite a shock to the system. Aunt Zhou didn't press the matter and went to make the arrangements. Xiaoyu then added that she should inform Uncle Lu he wasn't needed tomorrow either. She hesitated for a second before nodding. She knew better than to question the master's decisions. It seemed the entire Lu family was being cut loose. After effectively firing Rian's father, Xiaoyu finally sat down in the dining room, feeling a strange sense of relief. He noticed Ningbin stealing glances at him, but the moment he sat down, she awkwardly looked away, clearly feeling out of place. He hadn't realized how innocent Ningbin was back then. It was almost charming, and he couldn't resist the urge to tease her a little. He asked her why she wouldn't look at him, jokingly wondering if he was that unpleasant to behold. His grades were poor, sure, but his face was fine. She quickly denied it, trying to maintain her composure, but if one looked closely, they could see the faint blush creeping up her neck. We can see that even her ears had turned red. Xiaoyu chuckled and asked if it was true that her grades had always been excellent. Faced with this sudden warmth, Ningbin was still a bit out of her element, simply replying that her grades were all right. He then asked if she could recommend any reliable tutors, noting that relying on Rian for help was no longer an option. In this life, he didn't want to repeat the mistake of assuming his father could protect him forever without ever cracking a book. While he still had the chance, he wanted to improve his grades, and he knew Ningbin's recommendations would be top tier. She was surprised he was looking for a tutor, remembering that Rian had previously mentioned having one of her own. Since they were classmates, Rian had used that excuse to stay at his house, but Xiaoyu explained the tutor had been fired. Rian looked down on him and lacked the patience to actually teach. All the money he'd spent on those lessons had gone to waste. Ningbin found this quite unexpected, but seeing that he was serious and not joking, she took a sip of water to hide her nerves. She admitted she didn't actually use tutors and was self-taught, offering to come over every day to help him herself if he didn't mind. Deep down, she assumed he would probably refuse, considering that until today, he had barely spared her a single glance. The fact that he had even invited her to dinner was already a shock, so she didn't want to get her hopes up too high. However, to her surprise, Xiaoyu looked absolutely delighted and asked if she was truly serious about the offer. Ningbin nodded, feeling overwhelmed by his reaction, while he worried if it might interfere with her own busy study schedule. She assured him it was no trouble at all. Though her face remained calm, her eyes held a certain newfound tenderness. The truth was, she had already finished the high school curriculum and secured a spot at a top university, but she kept that quiet. He thanked her, jokingly pleading with her not to look down on him for being a bit slow when it came to his studies. Rian was smart too, but she had zero patience. If he didn't understand a problem after one explanation, she would start insulting him. He had once been an average student, but her tutoring had actually caused his grades to drop and destroyed his self-confidence. Ningbin promised that wouldn't happen, suggesting she could come to his house every day after school so they could work together. As they ate, we see that Ningbin remained quite reserved, so Xiaoyu picked up his chopsticks and served her some food. He told her to make herself at home, just as Rian walked in after having dropped Jingyan off at his own house. She had just received the news that her father had been fired, and he had given her quite a scolding over the phone. Seeing that Xiaoyu hadn't waited for her to eat and that the dishes were already cold, her expression immediately darkened. He gave her a cold, indifferent glance and simply continued eating, even though Rian had come specifically to ask about her father. Upon seeing Ningbin there, she asked with clear displeasure why the girl was in the house at all. In the past, to please Rian, he had never allowed himself to get close to any other girls. Whenever Ningbin used to visit, he wouldn't even look at her before chasing her away, but now, he simply stated she was his guest. He asked if she had a problem with that, leaving Rian with no choice but to sit down and glare at him. She accused him of inviting Ningbin over just to make her angry, while Ningbin sat quietly by his side. Xiaoyu looked at her and told her she was overthinking things, adding that she really wasn't that important to him anymore. He used to think this woman was his entire world, but in this new life, he felt nothing but disgust and disdain. He knew that continuing to love someone like her would only lead his life back into a bottomless abyss. Rian scoffed, telling him he was delusional if he thought being with other girls would actually make her jealous. In fact, she claimed she'd prefer it if he stayed away so he wouldn't annoy her, before heading straight upstairs to her room. Xiaoyu was left speechless. Once Rian was gone, he noticed that Ningbin's gaze had become quite complicated. He told her not to listen to Rian's nonsense, though secretly, he worried if Ningbin was actually upset by the scene. To his surprise, Ningbin didn't say a single word, her attitude becoming somewhat cold and distant. After dinner, he walked her to the door and told her to get home safely, but she left without saying much in return. She seemed unusually quiet. As he returned inside, Rian was already coming back down the stairs, looking ready for another confrontation. We see him looking at her, thinking that while her actions are vile, her face is undeniably beautiful, projecting an image of gentle quietness. He had been fooled by that very look before, and now, Rian confronted him, demanding to know why he had fired her father. She hadn't brought this up in front of others, mostly because she didn't want anyone to know she was merely the daughter of the Jiang family's driver. Making a scene in front of Ningbin would have cost her too much pride, but Xiaoyu simply asked why he owed her an explanation for firing a driver. She snapped back that he was her father and that everything that happened that day was her doing, having nothing to do with him. She challenged him to come after her instead and just fire her as well. Interestingly, the moment she mentioned being fired, Xiaoyu felt his spirits lift. He stared at Rian and agreed without hesitation, asking her to repeat what she had just said, which left her completely stunned. Seeing her shock, he noted that since she always thought he was stupid, there was no point in continuing their current arrangement. He told her to move out of his house, as he would find another tutor. After all, since she started, his grades had only gotten worse. He told her she wasn't worth the high salary he paid her, a statement Rian initially took as some sort of a joke. However, she soon realized he was serious about firing her as his tutor, to which she retorted that his poor grades were simply because he was slow. She claimed he was too dull to keep up, noting that when she explained a problem to Jingyan once, he understood it immediately. She cruelly compared his intelligence to that of a pig, insisting that even with a different teacher, the results would be exactly the same. She argued that no one could teach him more because the problem lay entirely within himself, still blaming him even in this moment. Xiaoyu simply repeated his demand for her to move out, but Rian frowned, reminding him that he was still just a student. She lectured him on keeping his mind on his studies, claiming that was why his grades were poor, while wondering what he was even talking about. With a cold snort, she accused him of acting out simply because he was jealous of her close relationship with Jingyan. She claimed she only wanted to focus on her studies to get into a top university, unlike him, who didn't have to worry about money. Because he had more than enough wealth without an education, she told him it was impossible for them to be together right now. Xiaoyu watched her, genuinely shocked by her delusions, before finally asking after a few seconds who exactly said they wanted to be with her. Xiaoyu looked at her, wondering where Rian got such confidence to actually believe he wanted to be with her. He knew that without his favor, she was nothing, yet Rian simply assumed he was being stubborn and told him he could think whatever he liked. She warned him, however, that he shouldn't blame her for ignoring him when they sat down for dinner at home later. After saying her piece, she retreated to her room and slammed the door. Meanwhile, Xiaoyu returned to his own room and called Zhou Shun. He instructed Zhou Shun to move Rian's belongings out the next day, as his home had no room for someone trying to trample over him. After that, he obtained Bai Ningbin's number, saved it, and sent her a quick message asking if she had made it home safely. She didn't reply immediately, and the next morning, since he no longer had to pick up Lu Jingyan, he finally slept until he woke up naturally. Our protagonist assumed Rian would have left by then, but to his surprise, he found her sitting at the dining table waiting for him. He sat down and began enjoying his breakfast, realizing that because he used to rush to pick up Jingyan, he rarely ate a proper meal at home. Seeing Rian waiting there, he felt a sense of irony, considering he was no longer planning to be her chauffeur. He told her he wasn't going to pick her up and she should leave early. Then, after finishing his meal, he headed out with Rian following closely behind. A new driver was already waiting and opened the door for him, but as Xiaoyu sat down, Rian followed him right into the car. He looked at her and asked what she was doing, reminding her that she had claimed they weren't traveling the same path anymore. He remembered her words from yesterday perfectly, yet Rian remained silent, looking quite pure and innocent despite her inner thoughts. Deep down, she told herself she was only there because her father insisted she coax him, otherwise she wouldn't bother with someone so arrogant. She despised how he used his wealth to bully others, but since her father needed the job, she endured it. Xiaoyu, however, simply told the driver to go. When they arrived at the school gates, Xiaoyu stepped out with Rian still trailing behind him like a shadow. Usually, they would have brought Lu Jingyan along, but today Jingyan had arrived by bus and hurried over the moment she saw Rian. Jingyan's gaze fell on Xiaoyu, still confused by yesterday's scene where the son of a mere driver, or so she thought, dared to be so defiant. Seeing Rian and Xiaoyu arriving together despite the tension, she approached them and asked if they were back on good terms. As for whether they had made up, Xiaoyu didn't bother to answer. He simply walked inside while Rian watched his retreating figure. Seeing that he wasn't waiting for her at all, she knit her brows slightly and turned to Lu Jingyan, claiming she had nothing to argue about with him. She told Jingyan that letting the son of a commoner bully her like that showed she had far too much patience. Rian noted that everyone was gossiping about Xiaoyu being some young master, but insisted they shouldn't care about such opinions. She explained that since her father was on good terms with Xiaoyu, he had asked her to look after him, and she couldn't exactly ignore him. Hearing that she was only acting this way because of her father, Jingyan felt a small sense of relief deep down. We moved to the classroom, where Wang Yin was already waiting. She stood in the way, blocking Xiaoyu from entering his seat. Wang Yin glanced at him and called him shameless, accusing him of abandoning the school beauties, Rian and Jingyan, the day before. She criticized him for taking the car for himself, but Xiaoyu simply looked at her and let out a soft, amused chuckle. He pointed out that since it was his car, he had every right to refuse passengers, and asked her exactly who she thought she was to interfere. Seeing him so confident, the surrounding students grew curious, asking if that Maybach really belonged to his family. Xiaoyu gave a calm look to the person speaking, but Wang Yin just burst out laughing at the very idea of it. She claimed they all knew exactly who he was, and mocked him for trying to act like a wealthy young master when he lacked the status. She reminded everyone that the driver was his father, and his whole family worked for the Lius, a classic case of forgetting one's place, it seems. She insisted Rian was only being kind by not kicking him out, and warned him not to push his luck any further. Since Wang Yin was close with Jingyan, and Jingyan was always with Rian, the crowd naturally began to believe her words. Just then, Rian and Jingyan appeared at the classroom door, though Rian's expression looked remarkably stiff and uncomfortable. To be honest, Wang Yin's words weren't just insulting Xiaoyu, they were indirectly humiliating Rian as well. Rian walked over and told Wang Yin to get back to her own seat. Wang Yin could only give her a helpless, lingering glance. Sensing Rian's clear displeasure, Wang Yin finally moved her things, and Rian took her seat next to Xiaoyu once again. Xiaoyu paid no mind to her behavior. After all, he wasn't the least bit concerned with her antics. As a favorite of the teachers with excellent social standing, no one would dare question her seat change. Sitting beside Jingyan, Wang Yin felt a prickle of resentment and asked him what Rian could possibly be thinking. She couldn't understand why Rian protected Xiaoyu when he was so disrespectful, even going as far as living with him. Jingyan assured her it was just a favor for her father, nothing more, and told her not to overthink it. Wang Yin realized the situation, yet she still found it absurd that Xiaoyu had claimed that luxury car belonged to him. She noted that while Rian's phone and gifts were clearly expensive, Xiaoyu's own phone told a very different story. It was an ordinary model, much like her own, making his attempt to pose as a wealthy heir seem rather unbelievable. Meanwhile, Xiaoyu stole a glance at his phone to find that Bai Ningbing had finally replied with a single, cold letter. Her indifference was striking, especially considering how friendly she had seemed just the day before, which, naturally, was confusing. It had taken her until now to reply to a message from the previous night, all while Rian watched him from nearby. Seeing him focused on a message from Ningbing, Rian couldn't help but knit her brows in quiet frustration. To her, he seemed like an entirely different person since yesterday, though his outward appearance remained the same. Xiaoyu sent another message asking if she would still come for tutoring, to which Ningbing gave a simple, one-word confirmation. That was enough for him. He turned his full attention to the lesson, studying with an intensity we haven't seen before. When noon arrived, Jingyan and Rian prepared for lunch, and Rian instinctively asked if he was joining them. His sudden dedication to his studies was honestly quite baffling to her, especially since he hadn't even dozed off once. He was busy organizing his notes, a far cry from the boy who used to spend every waking moment thinking only of her. Seeing him still working long after the bell had rung, Rian's curiosity finally got the better of her. But Xiaoyu acted as if she hadn't spoken at all, completely ignoring her presence as Jingyan watched the scene unfold. Jingyan suggested they leave Xiaoyu behind and bring him something later, but Xiaoyu politely declined his offer. In everyone's eyes, Jing Yin was a genuinely good person, always maintaining a positive attitude toward others. Even when people mocked him behind his back, he remained optimistic. But Xiaoyu had no desire to owe anyone any favors. He carefully organized his belongings and stood up, choosing not to join the others as they laughed and chatted. Walking beside Ruyan, Jing Yin asked what was wrong with him and why he was suddenly ignoring her so completely. Ruyan was equally puzzled. She was trying to understand why his usual devotion had vanished so abruptly. Normally, no matter how cold she was, he would follow her like a loyal puppy, yet since yesterday, everything had changed. It was truly a confusing state of affairs. Jing Yin then asked if she planned to invite him to her birthday party this weekend. It was indeed Ruyan's birthday week. Last year, the celebration had been held at the prestigious Royal Pavilion Hotel. Xiaoyu had arranged everything back then, spending hundreds of thousands so Ruyan could invite the entire class. The classmates had been full of praise, feeling that attending Ruyan's party was a true mark of social status. This year was supposed to be the same, as Xiaoyu had already handled all the arrangements days in advance. If he hadn't mentioned firing her, Ruyan wouldn't be worried, but his cold behavior today made her overthink things. She wondered if the party would even happen if he didn't show up. To be honest, it was a valid concern. Watching his retreating figure, Ruyan tried to reassure herself that there was absolutely nothing to worry about. She told herself he would definitely come. After all, he would never ignore her birthday. Perhaps this coldness was just an act. She even imagined he might be trying to surprise her. Feeling slightly relaxed, she told Jing Yin that he would surely be there. Jing Yin agreed, noting he was always present for her birthdays. That afternoon, the two of them headed to a school rehearsal. Xiaoyu didn't wait for them and went straight home, where he found that Ningbing had already arrived to meet him. Seeing her there with her dog, a genuine smile touched his face, perhaps because of the deep connection from his past life. Because of their shared history, Xiaoyu felt that every moment he spent with her now was incredibly precious and rare. Seeing the warm smile on his face, Ningbing felt a bit surprised. She had grown quite used to his usual cold and willful demeanor. His recent enthusiasm was so overwhelming that it made her shy, almost afraid to give him orders. He smiled and asked why she was so early. He suggested they head straight to the study, leading Ningbing upstairs. During his classes earlier that day, he had realized something important. There were many concepts he didn't understand, and he hoped to ask for her guidance. As they sat down, we see him reflect on the past. The seat beside him had once belonged to Ruyan, but even when she sat there, she never actually bothered to help him with his lessons. In fact, she used to complain that he was merely a distraction to her own studies. Now, however, Ningbing quietly took that seat beside him. Xiaoyu focused intently on finishing his practice exam before handing it over. Ningbing took the paper and studied it in silence for a moment. Feeling a bit ashamed, he apologized for being slow, but she gently assured him it wasn't a lack of intelligence, but rather a matter of method. She offered to help him brush up on the basics first, and he quickly agreed. As she began her lesson, Ningbing kept her head down. She didn't even look at him, focusing entirely on the material, yet her way of explaining things was remarkably clear and easy to follow. Many things that had confused him before suddenly became simple under her guidance. To be honest, she was a natural teacher. After teaching for a while, Ningbing began to feel thirsty. When she finally looked up, she realized he had been watching her the entire time. Feeling a bit self-conscious, she swallowed hard and quickly turned her gaze back to the textbook, asking if there was a problem. He remarked on how patient she was in person, noting that she seemed much colder over the phone, barely sending more than 2 words. He wondered aloud if she had a negative opinion of him because of his history with Ruyan. She quickly denied it, explaining her family had visited. She had been too busy to reply to his messages immediately, and by the time she saw them, it was already the next morning. She told him he could call her anytime if he needed help, but just as the two of them were settling back into work, his phone suddenly rang. He hurried to answer it, only to hear Ruyan's voice on the other end of the line, sounding quite agitated. She demanded to know what he meant by his recent actions. Hearing her accusatory tone, he could only wonder what he had supposedly done wrong now. He truly had no idea how he had offended her this time, but Ruyan's voice crackled with rage as she accused him of throwing all her things away. He couldn't help but glance at Ningbing, making no effort to hide the conversation as he told Ruyan directly that he had already warned her yesterday. Since she was fired, there was simply no reason for her to stay in his house anymore. He told her not to bother him while he was in class. With that, he hung up the phone. Meanwhile, we see Ruyan standing before the door, staring in disbelief as her luggage is tossed out onto the street. She couldn't believe he was actually capable of this, that he was truly kicking her out. After ending the call, Xiaoyu turned back to his guest. He calmly suggested to Ningbing that they continue their lesson. She agreed, but a moment later, the study door was suddenly pushed open. Ruyan stood in the doorway, her face darkened with a fury that was hard to miss. Her gaze was cold and sharp as she looked inside. The moment her eyes landed on Xiaoyu and Ningbing sitting together, a flicker of pure contempt crossed her expression. Seeing her standing there, he stood up and asked what she wanted, reminding her that she supposedly didn't like him or respect him at all. She looked at him with a sneer, her pride wounded by the sight of him with someone else. It was clear she still felt superior to him, despite her current situation. She pursed her lips tightly and told him not to think that bringing another woman home would ever coerce her into doing anything for him. She declared that it was impossible for her to ever like him, let alone be with him. To be honest, her arrogance was almost impressive. After her dramatic exit, she even managed to bump into the door on her way out. Xiaoyu walked over to the window to watch her leave. He watched as she went downstairs, picked up her luggage, and walked away without looking back. She left quite decisively, all things considered. Rian had always been incredibly proud in front of him. Despite her family's poverty, she carried herself with a stubborn, unyielding spirit. No matter how well he treated her, she refused to yield to the temptation of his money. Ironically, that was exactly what he used to admire about her. Thinking back on it now, he found his past self's infatuation truly laughable. Ningbing, seeing him at the window, spoke up softly. She asked if he wanted to stop for the day, worried that his mood was too sour to continue. But he quickly assured her that wasn't the case. He told her his mood was actually quite good. He was simply remembering his past life and the many foolish things he had done back then. He wasn't actually grieving for Rian. In fact, seeing her in that state made him feel quite relieved because, at the very least, he no longer had to feel anxious about his future. By staying away from Rian, he wouldn't contract that illness again. And he certainly wouldn't meet such a tragic end this time. Ningbing then spoke up, suggesting that she should head home first. As she turned to leave, he stepped forward and caught her hand. Ningbing froze in surprise and turned back to look at him. She asked what was wrong. To be honest, he wasn't entirely sure why he did it, but he wasn't blind. He could tell she was upset. It seemed that whenever Rian appeared and made those scenes, Ningbing instinctively tried to distance herself from him. In the past, his relationship with Rian had been so close that he never hid his feelings for her. He suspected that everyone, including Ningbing, believed he was still in love with Rian. And of course, he truly had loved her once. If it hadn't been for the miserable end he suffered in his previous life, perhaps things would be different. Now, he simply wanted to enjoy his life. In the old days, he definitely would have brought Rian along with him. But now, he much preferred to invite Ningbing. After all, she was the marriage partner his father had arranged for him. Unless he actively fought against it, he would likely marry Ningbing after graduation. In the past, he had felt that his father didn't respect his wishes. But looking at her now, he realized she was just as beautiful as Rian. With her looks and her excellent family background, he felt he was the lucky one. She asked if he wasn't going to be with her. She was referring to Rian, of course. He countered by asking if she really wanted him to be with that woman so badly. He asked if she wanted him to keep avoiding her like before. She quickly denied it, so they settled on meeting this Saturday. When Saturday afternoon arrived, he was running a bit late. Upon entering, he noticed quite a few old friends at the door. They were all dressed quite elegantly. When he appeared, Wang Yan, a close friend of Jing Yan, spotted him and couldn't help but laugh. She mockingly asked Xiaoyu how he could possibly have the nerve to show his face there, which was a bit much, really. He frowned in confusion, wondering why he shouldn't be there. After all, Sister Huang, the hotel owner, was a good friend of his father. He calmly reminded them that as a super VIP of this establishment, he could come whenever he pleased. He was curious why they thought otherwise. Wang Yin let out a cold laugh, noting that Rian hadn't spared him a single glance at school for the past 2 days. And yet, here he was. She mocked him for having the nerve to show up at Rian's birthday party uninvited. Rian's birthday. Yes, that was today, wasn't it? He had been so focused on his classes lately that the date had completely slipped his mind until they mentioned it. To be honest, he didn't care. He recalled how he had previously made all the arrangements with the staff at Sister Huang's hotel. It was Rian's 18th birthday, after all. In his past life, he had thrown her a grand, magnificent celebration at this very hotel, only for that to be the day he discovered the bitter truth. He remembered her snapping at him, telling Xiaoyu to stop interfering in her life. He had been so angry that they didn't speak for days. But back then, he couldn't help himself. He was the one who broke the silence and apologized first. He had been desperate to marry her. He had even committed the ultimate stupidity of handing over the company his father left him. Looking at the lively scene now, he felt nothing. He had no intention of entertaining them. Every detail of Rian's party had been arranged by him, and naturally, he was the one footing the bill. Now that he had come to his senses and stopped caring for her, he found it bold that she still dared to bring her friends here to spend his money. He was actually quite curious to see how she would handle the bill later. Ignoring his classmates' taunts, he stepped directly into the elevator. His table with Ningbing was already reserved, and he wondered if she had arrived. As the doors opened, he spotted Rian immediately. She was deep in conversation with Jing Yan, but her eyes locked onto Xiaoyu the moment he appeared. She had been waiting for this. She claimed she knew he would show up, despite his previous claims that he wouldn't. Rian began walking toward him with a smug expression. With a hint of triumph, she teased him about his change of heart. She warned him not to think that his presence meant she had forgiven him. She insisted she was still angry about his past behavior. It was her usual tactic, really, using her anger to force him into a state of submission. He looked at her, the corner of his mouth curling into a faint, amused smile. He simply asked her if there was something she needed. Startled, she asked if he wasn't there for her birthday. He countered by pointing out that she hadn't actually invited him, so why should he celebrate? He remarked that with so many classmates already there, she surely wouldn't miss one person. This left Rian looking visibly annoyed. She watched him with growing irritation, convinced he was still being stubborn and trying to ruin her birthday by picking a fight. Just then, the restaurant manager approached him with a respectful nod, addressing him as young Master Jiang. Xiaoyu asked if Ningbing had arrived yet. The manager confirmed she had, and Xiaoyu politely asked to be led to her. As the manager prepared to lead the way, Rian followed closely behind him, her voice sharp as she called his name. She asked if he had finally had enough, shocked that he was still insisting on meeting Ningbing in front of her. He glanced back, calmly stating that he wasn't the one making a scene. She was the one who had found him annoying, after all. He pointed out that since he had stopped pestering her, he didn't understand her reaction, especially with her friends waiting. He glanced at Jingyan, who seemed hesitant to follow, clearly surprised to see Rian acting so proactively towards Xiaoyu. Of course, we know exactly why she was being so persistent. It wasn't that she couldn't let go of him, but rather something else. She couldn't bear to lose the money in his pockets. In the past, she enjoyed everything he gave her while claiming she didn't like him. She used to reject his gifts with her words while accepting them quite happily in reality. Now that he ignored her, she was panicking. After all the preparation for this birthday banquet, she couldn't let it end abruptly. To be honest, her pride was at stake. She suggested that if his behavior was because of her relationship with Jingyan, she could distance herself if only he'd stop acting out. For the first time ever, she actually chose to take a step back. It showed just how desperate she was to save this party. It made sense really. If she didn't care so much about her image, she wouldn't have spent years playing the rich heiress at school. Nor would she have invited so many people to witness her celebration. It turned out that she was, in fact, terrified of losing face. Having seen her usual cold and noble persona, seeing her compromise just for the sake of a party was quite a revelation. He found the whole situation rather amusing. He nodded, acknowledging that it was indeed her birthday, and he shouldn't spoil the mood. With that, he turned back to the manager. He mentioned he had previously reserved the Emerald Pavilion under the name Rian. The manager quickly flipped through the reservation book to confirm the details of the booking. The manager nodded, agreeing that since it was Rian's birthday, everything should be handled perfectly for young Master Jiang. He instructed the staff to prepare the Emerald Pavilion immediately, and Xiaoyu simply gave a small, satisfied nod in response. We see him enter the room with a smile, asking Ningbing if she had been waiting long. She looked up, noting he had just arrived. She couldn't help but notice he looked a bit thinner. Without a second thought, he naturally took the seat right next to her. Ningbing hadn't expected him to sit quite so close, and she felt a flicker of unease. After all, there were plenty of other seats. He didn't seem to notice her slight discomfort and simply asked if she had ordered yet. She replied that she was still looking. He leaned in close to look at the menu in her hands. At this point, Ningbing wasn't even reading anymore. She was too aware of his presence. He mentioned wanting something with a strong flavor. It was as if the spice served to remind him that he was truly alive and well. The memories of his past life, the hunger, the cold, and the endless pain, still felt like a lingering shadow, even after his rebirth. The food was quite spicy, and he fanned his mouth before taking a cooling sip of watermelon juice. Ningbing watched him closely. She asked if he usually enjoyed spicy food. He admitted he liked it quite a bit, and she softly replied that she did as well. She followed his lead, picking up her chopsticks to join him. Nearby, the servers stood ready to assist at a moment's notice. A moment later, the owner of the restaurant, a man named Zhou Yi, walked in. Recognizing him, Xiaoyu greeted him politely as Uncle Zhou. Zhou Yi smiled warmly, noting that Xiaoyu was there as well, but his tone suggested that Xiaoyu wasn't the main reason for his visit. And indeed, we see Zhou Yi turn his full attention toward Ningbing. It was clear who the guest of honor truly was in his eyes. He addressed her respectfully as Miss Bai, welcoming her to the hotel and asking if everything was to her satisfaction. It turns out he was close with Xiaoyu's father, which was how he knew Ningbing's true identity. Most people, of course, had no idea. They didn't realize that the young heiress of the prestigious Bai family from the capital was currently hiding in plain sight here in Yun City. Ningbing gave a brief, polite acknowledgement and went back to her meal. To be honest, her coldness was a bit of a surprise. He had initially thought she was more outgoing, but seeing her now, he realized she rarely spoke to others. Zhou Yi simply stood by. A moment later, even as he personally poured her water, she remained silent, letting an icy aura of indifference fill the entire private room. The atmosphere became so heavy that Zhou Yi finally had to take the hint, politely excusing himself and telling them to enjoy their meal. Wait a moment, Uncle Zhou, Xiaoyu called out, causing the man to stop in his tracks just as he was about to leave. He turned back immediately, asking with a warm and enthusiastic smile if young Master Jiang had any other instructions for him. He truly seemed like a kind-hearted man, which is why Xiaoyu liked him, but he couldn't shake a memory from his past life. If he remembered correctly, a sudden and devastating fire had broken out at the Huangting Hotel on the third day of the birthday banquet. The cause was inadequate fire safety in the kitchen. Once the flames started, it was discovered that the fire extinguishers didn't work at all. That disaster had even resulted in casualties, and because of it, the hotel's reputation was completely destroyed. The top hotel in Yun City never recovered, and it was said that Zhou Yi himself fell gravely ill from the stress of the incident. Xiaoyu looked at Zhou Yi and asked if the hotel's fire safety measures were truly up to standard, catching the man off guard. Zhou Yi looked at him with a hint of surprise, wondering why the young master was suddenly so concerned about such a thing. Xiaoyu suggested it might be best to have someone check everything thoroughly, especially the kitchen area, just to be safe. Zhou Yi assured him that their fire safety was perfect and that no problems would ever occur, as they took full responsibility for their guests. Xiaoyu watched him quietly before suggesting that perhaps Uncle Zhou should go and personally inspect the equipment himself. Seeing such persistence, a flicker of dissatisfaction crossed Zhou Ye's face as he stared back, asking what exactly Xiaoyu meant by this. He asked if the boy didn't trust his word, reminding him that he and Xiaoyu's father were very close friends. He insisted that his character was well known to Xiaoyu's father and that he always ran his business with a clear conscience. To him, Xiaoyu's questioning felt like an insult to his integrity. After all, he viewed the boy as little more than a child. In his eyes, a kid couldn't possibly understand these matters. But then Ningbing spoke up, suggesting that since Xiaoyu mentioned it, he should go look. It was the first time she had spoken to him since he entered the room, and her words carried a weight that couldn't be ignored. Whenever Zhou Yi asked anything, she would only offer a brief word or two, yet her support here gave him all the face he needed. Zhou Yi quickly agreed to go. After all, Ningbing was incredibly composed, and her high status carried undeniable weight in this room. Even though she was nearly the same age as our protagonist, her words somehow seemed far more convincing to those around her. Once Zhou Yi left, Xiaoyu couldn't help but look at Ningbing in surprise, wondering why she had chosen to back his sudden request. He had made the suggestion because he possessed knowledge from the future, but from Ningbing's perspective, he should have known nothing at all. Ningbing simply listened and replied that since he had spoken up, it was only natural for her to help him out. When he asked if she wasn't afraid he was just talking nonsense, she calmly asked what that would even matter. She noted that even if it were a joke, making the man take a quick walk wouldn't cause any real harm. She spoke with such total indifference, yet as Xiaoyu watched her, a profound sense of warmth began to swell within his heart. It was the feeling of being deeply trusted, a sharp contrast to the moment in his past life when he was diagnosed with HIV. Back then, no one believed he was a victim. They all claimed he had been reckless, a lie he might have accepted if it were true. Everyone had pointed fingers at him with pure disgust, until he even began to loathe himself, never imagining the truth behind it all. It turned out Lu Rian had deliberately used a needle from an infected patient just to create an excuse to avoid their marriage. Only the one who frames you truly knows how innocent you are. We see the two of them continue their dinner for quite some time. Even after finishing the meal, they stayed for dessert, and Xiaoyu even brought out his homework to pass the time. The two of them remained there until evening, just as Lu Rian's birthday banquet was finally drawing to a close. But as the guests prepared to leave, everyone was suddenly detained because Rian had failed to settle the massive bill. Rian immediately called Xiaoyu, but he ignored the first ring while Ningbing sat nearby, quietly watching him refuse the call. He knew exactly who it was and didn't care, only picking up after Rian desperately called 2 more times. Over the phone, Rian's voice erupted with fury, demanding to know what he meant by this, and the angrier she got, the better. The angrier she became, the more Xiaoyu's mood brightened. He had no desire to associate with her, but the debts of his past life still had to be settled. Otherwise, he simply wouldn't be able to swallow that lingering bitterness. He curled his lips into a smirk and asked, "Well, school beauty Rian, what seems to be the trouble? Why such a massive fire? Just get over here and pay the bill," Rian hissed, lowering her voice as she warned him not to cause any trouble. She had originally planned to cut ties with him forever once the birthday banquet ended, never imagining he would be waiting for this exact moment. Now, with no money to settle the bill, everyone was being detained, and all eyes were fixed on her as they waited for a solution. Xiaoyu replied that it seemed quite strange. He hadn't even attended the party, so why should he be the one to pay? To be honest, it was a fair point. He suggested she ask her classmates to split the bill, since they all treated her so well, and their relationships were supposedly so close. After all, she often treated them to meals. In the past, Xiaoyu had given Rian over 100,000 in pocket money every single month. Rian had always taken it with total confidence, viewing the money as her rightful tutoring fee, and she had been quite generous with it. From time to time, she would treat everyone to dinner, leading them to believe she was a wealthy socialite who was well worth knowing. But of course, she was doing it all with Xiaoyu's money. "Xiaoyu, do you have to be like this?" she snapped. "What do I have to do to get you here to pay?" He calmly noted that if one is asking for a favor, they should at least show the proper attitude of someone making a request. Through the phone, we hear Rian exhale a sharp, indignant breath. She was clearly furious that he was no longer her unconditional servant. Xiaoyu's smirk widened as he told her that if she wasn't willing to ask nicely, then he would simply hang up and move on with his evening. "I'm begging you." Rian gritted her teeth, clutching the phone. She and her guests were currently blocked by hotel staff and couldn't leave. Xiaoyu hung up and stood, telling Ningbing he would be out for a moment before making his way toward the Emerald Hall. Inside, the classmates who had attended the banquet were still stuck in place, their festive mood having long since evaporated. Everyone was staring at Rian, and the atmosphere had become incredibly awkward. Since they couldn't leave, Rian could only endure their judgment. The moment Xiaoyu appeared, the manager walked over and greeted him with a polite, "Young Master Jiang." Xiaoyu looked at the circle of people, all dressed in their finest attire, remembering how they had all looked down on him earlier that afternoon. Earlier, they had all looked down on him, but now, that arrogance had completely vanished. After all, nothing is more humiliating than being trapped because you can't pay. Xiaoyu looked around and asked what was wrong, noting that for Rian's birthday party, everyone seemed remarkably unhappy. To be honest, the irony was hard to miss. He made a point of looking at Rian, whose expression was darker than anyone else's, while Lu Jingyan stood nearby, looking quite uncertain about the situation. The manager explained that Miss Rian hadn't settled the bill, and he was simply asking them to pay before they could leave. Xiaoyu acted as if it were a minor misunderstanding, telling the manager there was no need for such a fuss since they were his classmates, and he would pay. With that, he handed over his card. As the manager went to process the payment, we see the expressions of the other guests begin to shift and grow complicated. They wondered why Rian, who was celebrating her own birthday, had to call Xiaoyu to settle the bill. It was a very good question, indeed. Rian felt her face burning with shame as she stared at him. She realized now why he had come so easily. His goal was to humiliate her. She told herself he wanted everyone to know she was actually broke and relied entirely on his money. It was a bitter pill to swallow. In her mind, he could have handled the payment discreetly, but instead, he chose to make a grand, public display of it. By swiping his card in front of everyone, she felt he was acting like a madman. A moment later, the manager returned after finishing the transaction. He handed the card and the receipt back with a respectful bow, confirming that the payment for young Master Jiang was complete. Xiaoyu checked the receipt and intentionally read the total aloud. 860,000. A staggering amount for a single dinner, wouldn't you say? He wished Rian a happy birthday and told her he would cover the bill this time, but he made it very clear there wouldn't be a next time. After speaking, he glanced at Lu Jingyan, who was standing right there, his face turning a sickly shade of pale gray. The classmates were reeling. Was Rian's money actually coming from Xiaoyu? They had all assumed she was a wealthy heiress, but the reality was far different. The scene was a massive shock to everyone present. Suddenly, a girl named Wang Yin stepped forward and confronted Xiaoyu directly. She asked him if he was joking, claiming that Rian's money was only with him for safekeeping because he was just the son of her family's servant. She sneered, asking why he was acting so proud for simply managing her funds, and mockingly asked if his own family kept their money with servants. Xiaoyu looked at Wang Yin and gave a soft, knowing smile. He noted that if she truly believed he was just the son of a servant, then things were about to get interesting. He decided to set the record straight. He wasn't the servant, but rather, Rian's father was his family's driver who had abandoned him at the school gates. After choosing to drive off with Rian and Lu Jingyan instead, the driver had already been fired. If they didn't believe it, they could simply ask Rian. As we see him turn his gaze toward Rian, she stares back at him, her eyes filled with nothing but bitter resentment. In all her life, no matter how little she had never endured such humiliation. Now, everyone was watching her life become a joke. Yet, she couldn't say a word, knowing he could easily refund the money and leave her trapped there. To be honest, she was utterly powerless. Ignoring him completely, she turned and walked out, while Lu Jingyan, having witnessed the entire spectacle, followed closely behind her. The situation was becoming unbearable for her, but she had no choice but to leave. Earlier that day, she had been quite carried away with herself. She had bragged to her classmates about her relationship with Rian, thinking it would make her the envy of the entire school. She imagined that by announcing their status, she would gain prestige as the partner of a wealthy heiress, but she never expected this revelation. The realization that Rian was just a driver's daughter left her wondering why she had bothered to fake being rich in the first place. Once the pair had departed, Xiaoyu glanced at the remaining guests and calmly suggested that since the drama was over, they should all head home. He reminded them to be careful on the way back, noting that it was getting late, as the crowd slowly filtered out of the Emerald Hall. After watching them leave, Xiaoyu finally stepped out of the hall, with the manager personally escorting him all the way to the elevator. At that moment, Bai Ningbing arrived, and the two of them entered the elevator together in a heavy, contemplative silence. Although he had successfully cleared his name in front of everyone, deep down, he didn't feel the surge of joy he had expected. Compared to the years of suffering he had endured, this small punishment for Rian felt insufficient to truly dissolve the resentment in his heart. Seeing his silence, Bai Ningbing chose not to disturb him, and as they reached the ground floor, they were met by an unexpected sight. Grandpa Zhou was there, and upon seeing them, he immediately walked toward Xiaoyu. This time, his focus wasn't on Bai Ningbing at all. It was Xiaoyu he wanted. Grandpa Zhou took his hand and expressed his deep gratitude, saying the young man had saved the hotel from a disaster. He explained that he had just finished a personal inspection and discovered exactly what had been going on behind the scenes. He admitted many issues were due to his cousin's incompetence, and naturally, he had already sent the man packing. Curious, Grandpa Zhou asked how he could possibly have known about the hotel's fire safety issues. The question caught Xiaoyu off guard, forcing him to offer a quick excuse about seeing it in a dream last night. Grandpa Zhou couldn't help but laugh at such a response, deciding not to press the matter any further. He then mentioned he had prepared gifts for the two of them, signaling for his nearby assistant to step forward. The assistant brought over 2 small gifts in bags as a token of gratitude for the young man's help. He told Xiaoyu to reach out whenever he needed anything, clearly keeping this debt of gratitude close to his heart. As Grandpa Zhou saw them out, the Bai family car arrived. Xiaoyu sat inside, watching the streetlights pass by. There weren't many pedestrians left, though the traffic was still heavy, reminding him of his usual talks with Bai Ningbing. This time, however, things were exceptionally quiet, and Bai Ningbing didn't disturb him as he reflected on his strange foresight. He wondered how he could predict the hotel's fire hazards when he shouldn't know their business better than Grandpa Zhou. We see him consider the drama at the Emerald Hall. It was Rian's birthday, yet he hadn't spent it by her side. Instead, he had stayed with Bai Ningbing, and to make matters worse, he had left Rian in utter humiliation. He truly wanted to break ties with Rian completely, yet he wondered why he still looked so dejected. In truth, his sadness was fleeting, as he reminded himself that he had been given a second chance at life. Everything could be redone, as long as he avoided his past mistakes. There was still time to change his fate. Soon, a wave of exhaustion hit him, as the daily grind of being a serious student was proving quite draining. Feeling as though he could sleep for days, he eventually leaned over and drifted off against Bai Ningbing's shoulder. Bai Ningbing froze, not daring to move even as her arm grew numb by the time they reached the Jiang residence. She refused to shift her position for fear of waking him, remaining perfectly still as the car came to a halt. Bai Ningbing glanced outside before her gaze settled on Xiaoyu's pale face, hesitating over whether she should wake him. By then, the driver had already stepped out to wait, yet Bai Ningbing remained still, making no move to disturb him. Feeling the car come to a complete stop, Xiaoyu finally blinked his eyes open and realized they had arrived home. He looked toward Bai Ningbing, only to find her sitting there in silence, seemingly afraid to even meet his eyes. Gently rubbing his sore neck, he sat up straight and noted that they had indeed reached their destination. Bai Ningbing nodded, prompting him to ask why she hadn't woken him. She simply replied that he looked so peaceful. As usual, her face remained expressionless, but we see that her ears had turned a telltale shade of crimson. He knew she was innocent at heart, but he hadn't expected her to be quite this shy as she looked back at him. Xiaoyu asked if she was actually afraid of him, but she denied it, despite her refusal to look his way. He teased that she acted as if she hated being near him, causing Bai Ningbing to let out a small, nervous cough. She admitted she wasn't used to such proximity, noting that he was the first person she had ever allowed this close. Xiaoyu laughed, asking why she didn't just push him away. To prove he wasn't leading her on, she changed the subject. She asked why he and Rian had broken up, considering how much he had supposedly adored her in the past. The question gave him pause. Staring at the empty street, he simply stated that he had realized he no longer loved her. He bid her goodbye and stepped out of the car just as the gates to the Jiang residence began to slowly swing open. His father, Jiang Qingming, walked toward the entrance, and Xiaoyu's eyes lit up at the sight of him. He greeted his father warmly, noting that since Qingming was usually so busy, Xiaoyu was often left home alone. Though there were many servants, few could truly manage him, especially since his father tended to spoil him so much. His father's only wish was for his son to be happy, making those the most carefree days of his life, at least, at first. In his past life, he had ignored his father's warnings about Rian, but seeing him now, everything felt different. At first, his father's expression was quite stern, as if he were trying to regain a bit of paternal dignity in front of his son. But who could have guessed Xiaoyu would suddenly burst into tears? Jiang Qingming panicked instantly and gently patted his son's shoulder. He asked what was wrong and if someone had bullied him, immediately suspecting that girl, Lu Rian. He had heard Xiaoyu fired her and her father, but Xiaoyu simply hugged him tight, offering no explanation at first. He told his father he simply missed him, to which the older man called him a silly boy, noting how Xiaoyu usually found his calls annoying. His father then gestured toward the street, asking if that was the Bai family's car parked outside. Only then did Xiaoyu turn back to see the car, just as Bai Ningbing was stepping out to say her goodbyes. Feeling a bit embarrassed that she saw his red, teary eyes, he explained that she had driven him home after they went out for dinner. Jiang Qingming looked on with clear surprise, remembering how fiercely his son had once resisted the very idea of this engagement. Xiaoyu had even claimed he would never have anything to do with her, yet here they were, spending the evening together. Though he didn't know what had sparked this change, Qingming smiled and invited Bai Ningbing inside for a moment. She politely declined, greeting him as Uncle Jiang before explaining that she should probably head home for the night. She stole one last glance at Xiaoyu before driving away, leaving him to follow his father back into the house. His father asked again if Bai Ningbing had bullied him, seeing his son's lingering distress, but Xiaoyu quickly shook his head. He insisted she had been quite good to him, then sat on the sofa, feeling his father's concerned gaze lingering on him. He realized his father looked so young now. In his memories of the end, the man had seemed to age a lifetime in just a few years. Only after Jiang Qingming was absolutely certain that Rian hadn't hurt him did he finally allow himself to relax. The next Sunday morning, Xiaoyu woke to the news that Lu Ruyan had arrived at the house, which was quite unexpected. The memory of their falling out was still fresh, and he assumed she understood that he was done playing her games. He headed downstairs, only to find that Rian hadn't come alone. She had brought company with her. We see Rian and her father, Uncle Lu, sitting on the sofa, where the older man was busy addressing Jiang Qingming. He claimed Rian had been immature and that he'd already scolded her, promising she would never bully Xiaoyu again. Jiang Qingming's brow furrowed at the casual mention of his son's name. To be honest, he had never liked this pair. He only tolerated them to avoid a rift with his son, but Uncle Lu quickly realized he had overstepped his bounds. He apologized immediately, correcting himself to young master, just as Xiaoyu began walking down the stairs. The man quickly shifted his gaze toward the boy, wishing him a good morning and explaining they were there to apologize. Xiaoyu turned his gaze toward Ruyan, noting her gloomy expression and the heavy silence she maintained. An apology? He didn't think for a second that Ruyan was actually there to seek forgiveness, given the resentment on her face. She clearly still held a grudge over the previous night. Xiaoyu calmly told Uncle Lu that no apology was necessary. He insisted she hadn't offended him, but the father pressed on, mentioning he'd heard Xiaoyu had fired her. When Uncle Lu himself was fired, he hadn't been this anxious. After all, his own monthly salary wasn't much. But Ruyan's position was different. She earned a fortune just for tutoring, and they had hoped the Zhang fortune might one day be hers. Now that things had turned sour, Uncle Lu was desperate to fix the situation, but Xiaoyu remained firm. He pointed out that his grades had only dropped during her years of tutoring, and that Ruyan clearly felt the job was beneath her. He joked that he was simply too dim-witted for her to teach, so he decided to grant her the freedom she wanted. He maintained there was no conflict and she hadn't done anything unpleasant, so an apology was quite unnecessary. Jiang Qingming glanced at his son, noticing how incredibly calm and composed he remained while saying all of this. In the past, Xiaoyu had insisted on Ruyan being his tutor, leaving his father no choice but to agree to the arrangement. Seeing his son finally fire her left Qingming surprised, but also deeply moved. It seemed the boy had finally grown up. Citing his classes and breakfast, Xiaoyu watched as his father had the pair escorted out before heading out himself. The driver was already waiting in the courtyard. As the car pulled out of the Jiang estate, we see Xiaoyu notice Ruyan still standing there. Her father was at the gate too, but his gentle demeanor from inside the house had vanished. Uncle Lu raised his hand and slapped her. Xiaoyu knew her history well. Her father was a gambler, and her mother, unable to take it anymore, had abandoned Ruyan and fled years ago. She had grown up with her father, relying on money borrowed from relatives just to pay for her schooling until she was old enough to work. Despite those hardships, she had managed to excel in her studies, consistently ranking first in the entire school, a feat that was quite impressive. Because of this, Xiaoyu had truly cherished her, looking after her and trying to give her the very best of everything he had. But while he felt for her, she never felt for him. She saw him as a mere ATM, while her heart belonged to someone else entirely. He looked away and headed straight to school. After the events of the previous day, the atmosphere among his peers had shifted significantly. His classmates' attitudes seemed much warmer now, and they began approaching him to chat, asking if his family was truly that wealthy. They realized all of Ruyan's money had come from him, though they had always assumed she was a wealthy heiress herself. Xiaoyu noted they already knew the truth, but they found it strange that despite his kindness, she chose Lu Jingyan over him. One girl even joked, suggesting the young master should look her way instead, promising she would be far more obedient than Ruyan. Xiaoyu looked at the girl speaking to him, and hearing her bold words, he couldn't help but feel a sense of amusement. He let out a spontaneous laugh just as Ruyan appeared on the scene, having overheard the girl's flirtatious remarks. Ruyan gave a cold sneer, telling the girl that even if she wanted him, Xiaoyu wouldn't even bother looking at her. She claimed he already had a new target in mind, so the girl would just have to wait in line like everyone else. Upon hearing Ruyan mention a new target, everyone turned to look at Xiaoyu, wondering who could possibly be better than her. They doubted there was anyone in school more outstanding than Ruyan, even if her status as a wealthy girl had been a lie. Her academic record was flawless, and she was undeniably beautiful, leading everyone to believe her future potential was immense. Ruyan didn't bother answering the crowd. Instead, she fixed her gaze on Xiaoyu, the boy who had spent so long at the bottom of the class. Ruyan sneered, claiming that just because she refused to be his loyal dog anymore, Xiaoyu was lashing out. To be honest, her logic was a bit skewed. She declared she would never like him, especially since he was a poor student who only relied on his family's wealth to get what he wanted. She told him that even if everyone fawned over him, he wasn't worth a single finger of Lu Jingyan. As soon as she mentioned that name, the crowd was reminded of the deep rift between them. It seemed Ruyan was determined to double down on her pride. Before he could even respond, Ruyan brought up the previous night's birthday party, claiming he was the one who forced her to invite everyone. She insisted she never wanted to go and accused him of intentionally embarrassing their classmates. She asked if he thought money gave him the right to toy with people's dignity. She even told him to stop lying about supporting her, which was a bold claim, to say the least. She argued that the money was simply payment for the tutoring she provided, and she vowed never to take a cent from him or help him again. After finishing her speech, Ruyan immediately swapped seats with another student, acting as if she wanted absolutely nothing to do with him. It was clear she was trying to reshape her image in front of the class, playing the part of the mistreated, hard-working scholar. We return to Xiaoyu's thoughts, where he recalled her desperate plea for help the night before. Seeing her father strike her earlier had made him feel a bit of pity. But now, seeing her arrogance, he felt her father hadn't hit her hard enough. He decided he wasn't going to indulge her delusions any longer. He mocked her tutoring claim, asking if she truly had the nerve to say that. Since she started helping him, she had done nothing but spend his money. He pointed out that his consistently bottom-tier grades were the only result of her supposed teaching, which, naturally, was a very fair point. Ruyin remained expressionless, simply stating that he was far too stupid and that his lack of intelligence had nothing to do with her. She even suggested that since he was so wealthy, he should try to buy himself a new brain. At those words, several students couldn't help but laugh. Xiaoyu looked at her self-righteous expression and asked if she was certain the problem was his brain and not her terrible teaching methods. Ruyin then remembered that Bai Ningbing was now tutoring him. She let out a soft, dismissive snort at the thought of her rival. She challenged him, saying that if he was so confident, he should prove it with his results during the next monthly exam. She claimed that if his rank improved by even 100 spots, she would be willing to admit that her teaching was the problem. She was eager to see if Bai Ningbing could actually teach someone whose brain simply didn't work. It was a bold challenge, to say the least. Xiaoyu stared at her, noting that she only asked for a 100-spot improvement. It was a clear sign of just how much she looked down on him. Seeing that he was ready to accept, Ruyin turned to the crowd and announced that everyone had heard him agree to the terms. She declared that if his rank improved by 100 spots in the next exam, she would personally run 10 kilometers as punishment. The students turned their gaze toward Ruyin, their faces filled with excitement. Wang Yin then looked at Xiaoyu with a mocking grin. She joked that since Ruyin was risking a 10-kilometer run, Xiaoyu should do the same if he lost, assuming he could even finish it. She told him that if he was too cowardly, he should just admit defeat now. But Xiaoyu felt 100 spots wasn't such a high hurdle. After studying with Bai Ningbing for a few days, he found her methods much easier to grasp. He could feel himself making clear progress. So he agreed immediately. He figured this would be a good way to push himself, as we all know that having a goal provides motivation. Ruyin couldn't help but let out a small laugh at his stubbornness, calling him an idiot before finally taking her seat. She truly hadn't expected him to agree. Back when she tutored him, he never seemed to understand anything, so she knew his level perfectly. She was already looking forward to watching him struggle through those 10 kilometers. Just as the bet was settled, we see Lu Jingyan at the door. Jingyan had heard everything Ruyin said. He had been feeling down all night, but in this moment, his mind finally became clear. He told himself that Ruyin wasn't just brilliant and beautiful. Her character was what truly set her apart from the rest. Even with her poor background, her hard work made her 100 times better than a useless rich kid like Xiaoyu. He believed that one day, she would succeed on her own merits. Being with her didn't feel like a loss at all. With that thought, he walked over to her side. He told Ruyin that even if her father was just a driver, he earned his living honestly with his own 2 hands. It was a touching sentiment. He praised her for maintaining top grades despite her difficult circumstances, noting how hard her journey must have been to reach this point. He promised to always stand by her side. As Jingyan spoke, any students who had doubted Ruyin suddenly felt a wave of sympathy for her. The fact that Jingyan remained so loyal to Ruyin even now was truly something to behold. It seemed their bond was stronger than ever. The crowd felt their love was truly grand. Looking at Ruyin, who had always been a top student, they realized they didn't just like her for her money. They admired her character and academic excellence. In contrast, they saw Xiaoyu as someone who didn't even try, which made things worse. To them, it seemed shameless for him to want someone like her. We see the two of them putting on quite a performance together. Watching them, one might almost feel like weeping for such a touching love story. It was certainly a sight to behold. In fact, they seemed so perfect for each other that they should stay together forever. Xiaoyu realized he had lacked the foresight to stay out of it before. Because of Ruyin's words, everyone now viewed him as a complete failure. He had finally dropped the burden of being a servant-like follower. Now, because of his poor grades, people didn't really want to talk to him. But to be honest, he didn't care in the slightest. Compared to the lonely helplessness of his past life, their behavior was child's play. After all, he still had his wealth and his loving parents. He focused on his classes and couldn't be bothered with them. After school, his father arrived in the car with his mother to pick him up. They were both in their 40s now, but in their youth, they had been the campus beauty and heartthrob. Their elegance hadn't faded at all. His mother stepped out of the car and, upon seeing her son, immediately gave him a warm, loving embrace. It was a sweet family moment. She then thoughtfully opened the car door for him. Just then, Ruyin and Jingyan happened to walk out of the school together. They witnessed the entire scene. The classmates walking with them saw Xiaoyu with an older woman and couldn't help but feel curious. They began to wonder if this was Xiaoyu's new target. Earlier that morning, Ruyin had conveniently brought up a similar topic. They noted the woman looked to be about 40 and started whispering about what her relationship with Xiaoyu could possibly be. The speculation began to spiral. Some remarked that there was no way Xiaoyu could actually be a young master from a wealthy family. They acted as if they had finally seen through him. It was no wonder the school beauty, Ruyin, wanted nothing to do with him. They claimed they wouldn't respect someone like that either, calling the situation disgusting. As they slandered him, Xiaoyu just listened. Ruyin didn't bother to explain the truth to anyone. Jingyan looked at her, and seeing her silence, he assumed the crowd's guesses were correct. Suddenly, she felt a sense of relief. Even if his academic performance was disappointing, we know his family situation was far from what they imagined. Jingyan felt a lingering bitterness about Xiaoyu spending hundreds of thousands in a single night. Deep down, he felt she was naturally superior to him. But now, discovering that Xiaoyu was supposedly being supported by an older woman, Jingyan suddenly felt a sense of balance return to his world. At least he would never do something so shameless. He believed in achieving his dreams through his own hard work. Yes, that was his story. He told himself that one day, he would have everything Xiaoyu had. We see Jingyan and Rian boarding a bus together shortly after. Rian told him she couldn't see him home today. Since she could no longer earn money by tutoring Xiaoyu, she had to find a part-time job. Her father had accumulated massive gambling debts, and in the past, much of her money had been taken by him to cover those losses. Now, she had to find a way to support herself. Jingyan simply nodded and said that was fine. To be honest, he had little choice. Meanwhile, Xiaoyu's parents took him to buy a new phone before heading out for a meal. By the time they arrived, a special guest was waiting. Ningbing had already arrived. She lived in Yun City with her uncle, who happened to be very close friends with Xiaoyu's father, Qingming. This was meant to be a formal meeting between the two families. It was something Qingming had wanted to arrange for a very long time. Previously, Xiaoyu had strongly opposed the idea because he only had eyes for Rian, so this dinner had never actually happened until now. Seeing his son willing to join them today filled Qingming with relief. He felt that his son had finally grown up and was ready to listen. During the meal, the parents chatted happily with Ningbing's uncle. Xiaoyu sat next to Ningbing and decided to share a certain secret. He told her about the bet he made to improve his class ranking by 100 spots. After he finished speaking, Ningbing remained quiet. She simply gave a short response, leaving Xiaoyu unable to read her thoughts. He asked if she thought he was being too reckless or impulsive. He wondered if the pressure would be too much. Ningbing looked at him after hearing his words and simply said, "No, it's not like that." Xiaoyu then asked if she thought he had any hope, even though he could understand the problems she had been explaining to him lately. Ningbing looked at him and told him to just leave it to her. She added that he was actually quite bright, not stupid, like others claimed. The others she referred to was, naturally, Rian. Though Ningbing hadn't said anything when Rian called him stupid before, she had remembered it. Hearing this made Xiaoyu laugh with genuine relief. He told her that hearing her say those words finally put his mind at ease. Xiaoyu told Ningbing he would have to trouble her for a while, and she simply replied that it was her duty. Suddenly, we see the private dining room fall silent. Xiaoyu noticed the quiet and looked up, only to find his father and Ningbing's uncle both staring directly at him. It was a bit of a surprise, to say the least. Feeling quite awkward, he asked his father why he was staring. Qingming quickly looked away, claiming it was nothing at all. He told the youngsters to carry on. While Qingming continued chatting with Ningbing's uncle, deep down, he couldn't help but feel a sense of wonder. He marveled at how well the two were actually getting along. Although he was the one who arranged this engagement, he felt a strange, conflicting emotion. It was as if his own troublesome son was being led away by someone else. After the meal, Qingming and the uncle stayed behind to discuss business and medicine. Meanwhile, Xiaoyu and Ningbing left the restaurant first. Instead of heading straight home, they decided to find a nearby cafe to continue their work. Xiaoyu had a craving for ice cream, so he went to the counter to order. Once he finished, he returned to the table where Ningbing was waiting. He sat down beside her, and the two of them resumed their discussion of the study problems. At this moment, Xiaoyu's mind was completely filled with his lessons. After all, the bet was looming, and failing to improve his rank would be a devastating blow. Soon, a server arrived with their order. The waiter placed the items on the table. When Xiaoyu looked up, he was stunned to see the person standing there in the server's uniform. It was none other than Rian. He stared at her in complete disbelief, asking her what on earth she was doing there. Rian gave him a cold, piercing look. She told him that she should be the one asking that question, wondering if he knew she worked there. She accused him of coming here on purpose just to spite her. Despite his recent coldness, Rian was convinced that he was still deeply in love with her. She told herself he was only acting this way to force her to submit. Otherwise, how could he possibly show up at the exact place where she had a part-time job? To her, such a coincidence was impossible. Xiaoyu told her she was overthinking things and that their meeting was purely accidental. Rian glanced dismissively at Ningbing and didn't linger for a second. She turned and walked away immediately, clearly unwilling to waste another moment. Seeing her arrogant and self-important attitude, Xiaoyu truly couldn't understand what she was so proud of. He turned back and offered the ice cream to Ningbing. Ningbing declined, telling him to eat it himself. She then reached out and helped him pick up his school bag, which was a kind gesture. She helped him with his bag, and they walked out of the cafe together. In truth, Xiaoyu had planned to stay a bit longer to study. But as fate would have it, running into Rian in a place like this had completely ruined his mood. To be honest, it was quite the unwelcome distraction. Over the next 2 weeks, we see Xiaoyu throwing himself into his studies with everything he had, while Ningbing visited the Jiang house daily to tutor him. His grades were already showing significant improvement, yet whenever Rian saw him working so hard, she couldn't help but mock his efforts. She told him that if he felt any regret, it wasn't too late to give up now. Otherwise, she warned, he shouldn't come crying when the results were out. Xiaoyu simply frowned and told her she was being too loud. He had no interest in her drama anymore, which, naturally, was the best way to handle it. He immediately plugged in his headphones to drown her out. Finally, the monthly exams came to an end, and he felt an unusual sense of relief. Feeling exceptionally cheerful, he hurried home. Although the official results weren't out yet, he felt deep down that he had performed quite well. We returned to the house, where Ningbing was sitting in the courtyard drinking tea and keeping Dabai company. The dog, it seemed, was getting fatter by the day. Xiaoyu walked over to hug Dabai and remarked to Ningbing that she had arrived quite early today. It had become a bit of a routine for them. He admitted he was curious if she had any other activities at school. After all, Rian was also a top student at her own school. Rian and Lujing used to be busy with various school events every day, but by comparison, Ningbing seemed to have a much more relaxed schedule. Every time he returned home, she was already there waiting. She simply explained that she was quite free and that no one really restricted her time. When he asked if there were any school activities she had to attend, she mentioned that she generally didn't join the student council or other groups. Ningbing shook her head, noting that while she occasionally entered competitions, she usually stayed away. When he asked why, her answer was quite striking. She felt it was meaningless, and her teachers agreed that her participation was a bit like a dimensional strike that would make other students lose confidence. However, Xiaoyu recalled seeing her in many competitions before. Rian had mentioned that Ningbing seemed to be at every event she entered. Rian claimed that Ningbing had even taken away her first-place experiences, which was exactly why she harbored such a deep resentment toward her. Ningbing picked up her cup and took a silent sip of water. It seemed she generally didn't miss any competition where Rian was participating. Xiaoyu was desperate to know his score, so he sat in the courtyard and began checking his answers with Ningbing. It was a moment of high anticipation. He was in a great mood after realizing he had gotten many difficult questions right. He felt ready for the moment the official grades would be released. The homeroom teacher walked into the classroom and, out of habit, began by praising Rian and Lujing for their performance. Once again, they had secured first and second place, but after the usual praise, the teacher added that there was someone else to mention. That person was Xiaoyu. Hearing this, he immediately perked up, feeling a sudden surge of energy and anticipation. Rian shot him a quick glance, her eyes still brimming with mockery. Then, the teacher spoke again, noting that Xiaoyu's results were quite impressive. He had always been at the bottom of the class before, but this time, he had made a truly massive leap forward. His scores had actually pushed him into the top 200 of the entire grade. If he kept this up, the teacher said, he'd do well on the entrance exams. The top 200? At those words, everyone in the room stared in disbelief. It was a result no one had expected. Even Rian was stunned. She had expected him to improve by maybe 100 ranks at most, but certainly not this much. To be honest, even Xiaoyu hadn't expected such a dramatic rise. It was a level of success he hadn't dared to imagine for himself. Perhaps it was because, having suffered so much in his past life, he no longer cared for idle pleasures or distractions. He had been incredibly focused in class, listening to every word before going home to review everything with Ningbing. Ningbing was a gifted teacher. Even the most difficult problems seemed simple once she explained them. Hard work, it seems, really does pay off. One student asked if there was a mistake, wondering how Xiaoyu could improve so much, but the teacher was quite certain there was no error. The teacher looked at Xiaoyu with a calm expression. Previously, having a student who dragged down the class average had been a source of frustration. But now, seeing such incredible progress, that frustration had vanished. Who could have guessed he would improve this much? Feeling validated by the teacher's praise, Xiaoyu was genuinely happy. He noticed Rian watching him silently, so he decided to remind her of their bet. He asked her what she thought now, reminding her not to forget the 10-kilometer run she owed him. Rian bit her lip in pure frustration. She simply couldn't understand how someone she considered so dim-witted could improve so much. She wondered if Ningbing was truly that capable. After school, Rian was forced to start her 10-kilometer run. Xiaoyu didn't go home immediately, staying behind just to watch the spectacle. He sat quietly to the side, watching her struggle after her pride had taken such a hit. Deep down, he felt a strange sense of satisfaction. It was a truly satisfying moment, though Lujing watched from the sidelines, feeling a growing sense of irritation that Xiaoyu had become so cold. Wang Yin cast a sharp glance toward him and whispered to Lujing, asking what was so special about breaking into the top 200 anyway. She acted as if he'd taken first place, noting that even Rian didn't act that smug despite actually being at the top of the class. Lujing's gaze fell upon Rian as he spoke plainly, reminding everyone that if one makes a bet, they must be prepared to lose. Rian wasn't the type to back down from a loss, but Wang Yin muttered that even if his grades improved, his character remained questionable. She warned Lujing not to speak ill of others, telling him he was simply too kind for his own good, which, in this case, was likely true. Wang Yin patted Lujing's shoulder lightly. By the time Rian finished her 10-kilometer run, the sky had already begun to turn dark. Drenched in sweat, she walked back and asked if he was satisfied. He nodded, politely thanking her and welcoming another bet anytime. With that, he stood up and left the campus full of joy. Rian stood still, watching his silhouette as he walked away into the evening. At that moment, his mood was exceptionally bright, his steps light and rhythmic. In the past, we remember him only as her devoted follower. But now, he couldn't even be bothered to give her a second glance, his thoughts occupied entirely by his new life with Ningbing. Rian wondered if he truly intended to stay with Ningbing forever. After all, their families were both well off and perfectly matched. The thought of them actually being together began to take root in her mind, and it was a thought she found increasingly difficult to bear. As the realization hit her, Rian felt a sharp pang of possessiveness, as if something that belonged to her had been stolen away. Seeing her staring intently in Xiaoyu's direction, Lu Jing asked if she was tired and offered her some water to drink. He handed over a bottle of mineral water, and Rian reached out to take it, offering a quiet word of thanks. To be honest, she was exhausted. In front of Lu Jing, she always maintained an air of perfect politeness. Lu Jing acknowledged her hard work, though his mind was elsewhere. He remarked how strange it was that Xiaoyu, whose grades had always been abysmal, could suddenly make such a massive leap forward. He openly wondered if there had been cheating involved, suspecting that Xiaoyu had rigged the results just to make the school beauty lose. After all, Rian had tutored him every day before with no results, so how could he possibly improve so much all at once? Lu Jing shot a sharp glance at Wang Yan, warning her that making such bold claims without evidence was a dangerous game. He cautioned that if Xiaoyu decided to cause trouble, she wouldn't be able to handle the consequences. Wang Yan simply shrugged, planning to tell the teacher tomorrow. Meanwhile, we see Xiaoyu heading home, eager to share the news with Ningbing. After all, she was the reason for his success. Making Rian admit defeat was a victory Ningbing helped build, but upon arriving, Zhoushan informed him that the young lady hadn't come today. A wave of disappointment washed over him. He changed his clothes and headed to the dining room, feeling the silence of the house. With his father away on business, he was all alone. Needing to hear her voice, he decided to give Ningbing a call. At that very moment, Ningbing was swimming at her estate. A maid approached the pool, softly announcing that she had an incoming call. The figure in the water seemed not to hear it first, until the maid added that it was Jiang Xiaoyu calling. Suddenly, Ningbing surfaced. She stepped gracefully out of the water as the maid hurried forward, wrapping a soft towel around her shoulders to ward off the chill. As Ningbing picked up the phone, the stern expression she usually wore vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine warmth. Her voice softened as she answered, asking if he was busy or if she was perhaps interrupting his evening. Xiaoyu explained he had just been swimming and called because he heard she hadn't visited today, wanting to share some news. He couldn't hide his excitement as he told her his grades had skyrocketed, landing him in the top 200. Quite an achievement, really. He described how Rian had to run 10 kilometers, admitting that seeing her pride take a hit felt incredibly satisfying. Ningbing listened quietly. She moved to a lounge chair, patiently letting him share his joy. It was a rare moment of simple, shared happiness between them. After a while, he asked if she was still there. She offered her congratulations, and he wondered again if he was bothering her. She assured him it was fine and that she was free. He then noted how hard she had been working lately, tutoring him every single day. He suggested she take a couple of days off to rest, proposing that he could study on his own and ask questions online if needed. Ningbing agreed, but Xiaoyu didn't hang up just yet. He hesitated, noting that she sounded a bit unhappy. He asked if something had happened and if there was anything he could do to help. That simple question caught her completely off guard. Deep down, Ningbing wondered if she had let her guard slip, as she didn't think her behavior had changed much at all. She was surprised he could sense her mood through a simple phone call. Seeing her silence, Xiaoyu spoke up, knowing she tended to hide her feelings. He told her that while she kept her emotions tucked away, they were comrades in arms now, or so he liked to think. Since she had helped him so much, he felt it was only right to return the favor. Without her lessons, he knew he never would have achieved such results. He couldn't simply enjoy her help and dedication without giving back, especially since he knew she certainly didn't need his money. Hearing him describe their relationship as comrades brought a helpless, subtle smile to Ningbing's lips. It was a start, at least. On the following day, we returned to the school, where the class teacher walked in with a heavy expression and an air of palpable anger. Standing at the podium, she radiated a sense of intense pressure. Her gaze locked onto Xiaoyu, sharp and unforgiving. She ordered Xiaoyu to stand up immediately. He complied, staring back at the teacher with a look of genuine confusion. The teacher announced that someone had reported him for cheating on the monthly exam, asking if he had any explanation for his sudden success. At the mention of cheating, Xiaoyu glanced around the room, finding every eye in the class fixed squarely on him. He noticed Wang Yan sitting next to Lu Jing, her face practically glowing with a smug, triumphant smile. He turned back to the teacher with a serious expression. He calmly asked if there was any actual evidence to support such a serious accusation. The teacher, Lin Jingmei, sighed. She pointed out that his previous scores were heartbreakingly low, yet this time, his progress was almost impossibly dramatic. To be honest, such a leap was difficult for anyone to believe. To be safe, the school decided to give him a different set of questions. She asked if he had any objection to taking the test again. Naturally, being forced to prove himself twice didn't sit well with him. Wang Yan couldn't wait a second longer and jumped up, shouting that his hesitation was proof enough of his guilt. She taunted him, saying that if the grades were real, he shouldn't be afraid of a retest. She looked at him as if she had finally caught her prey. Xiaoyu found the whole display quite ridiculous. He reminded her that she had reported him without a shred of evidence. He argued that the burden of proof should be on the accuser, otherwise, it was just slander. If everyone could just make claims without proof, the school would be in chaos. He argued that if people like her reported him every day, he'd be stuck in a loop of retests and might as well stop attending class altogether. As he spoke, Wang Yin looked at him with a hint of surprise. To be honest, Xiaoyu's personality had always been rather soft in the past. Usually, when others were aggressive, he found it difficult to argue back, but this time his logic was remarkably clear and sharp. She wondered if this was even the same person. Having known him for so long, she thought she understood him, but now he felt like a stranger. We see him fighting back with sound reasoning, yet the teacher insisted that it wasn't surprising people were questioning his sudden leap in grades. She maintained that making him take the test again was actually for his own benefit, as it would be the only way to prove his innocence. She suggested he wouldn't want everyone whispering behind his back forever. Seeing the teacher's persistence, it was clear she didn't believe in his merit either. Xiaoyu smiled and told the teacher that while he could certainly take the exam again, he found the situation quite insulting. He felt that being doubted without any evidence was utterly ridiculous, especially coming from a classmate like Wang Yin. He questioned her motives, noting that if he scored even better next time, she would likely just find something else to complain about. Since she chose to report him without a shred of proof, he felt she should have to pay a price for her baseless accusations. He proposed a deal. If he proved he didn't cheat, she should be expelled. The mere mention of expulsion made the room go silent. The class teacher hesitated. Since Wang Yan's grades were generally better than Xiaoyu's, the teacher naturally harbored a bit of bias toward her. Xiaoyu pointed out that spreading rumors about cheating had a massive impact on his reputation and mental well-being. He suggested that if the pressure became too much and he did something drastic to himself, the consequences would be far worse for everyone. At the mention of self-harm, the atmosphere in the room grew tense. He turned to Wang Yin, asking if she was too afraid to bet on her own claims. Feeling provoked, Wang Yin immediately agreed to the wager. She was indignant and turned back to the teacher with absolute confidence. She told the teacher she was willing to bet her entire future on this, as everyone already knew what Xiaoyu's typical grades looked like. She asserted that he was definitely cheating and that his refusal to simply retake the test immediately was proof of his guilt. Wang Yin was convinced he was just stalling because he was nervous, and she urged the teacher not to let him talk his way out of it. He added that if it was confirmed Jiang Xiaoyu had cheated, she should also be expelled, as he had no desire to share a school with such a person. Before the teacher could even intervene, Wang Yin had already agreed. The class teacher then instructed Xiaoyu to come to the office immediately after class. With that, the teacher walked out. Wang Yin stared at him with a look that suggested she was simply waiting for the show to begin. Meanwhile, Lu Rian watched him, clearly stunned that he would actually stake his entire education on a gamble like this. She couldn't help but try to advise him, asking if he was truly certain about the bet, noting that being expelled for cheating would be far more humiliating. She suggested that if she were in his position, she would simply admit her mistake to the teacher, as a monthly exam wasn't such a massive deal. She claimed that if his apology was sincere enough, she could even plead with the teacher on his behalf. After all, his desire to beat her was already clear. She noted he had already watched her run 10 kilometers, so she was willing to let things go. We see her acting as if she only had his best interests at heart. He looked at her, remembering how she had been acting cold and distant lately, only to suddenly show up now with this facade of concern. He curled his lips into a smirk, pointing out that she clearly believed his grades were fake, which was the only reason she was advising him now. He told her that instead of lecturing him, she should go talk to her good friend Wang Yin instead. To be honest, the hypocrisy was hard to ignore. While Wang Yin was the one speaking up, Lu Jingyin wasn't innocent either. He was simply used to playing the role of the puppet master from the sidelines. Xiaoyu knew exactly what kind of person Lu Jingyin had been in his past life. He saw through the act perfectly this time around. Whenever things went poorly between him and Lu Rian, Lu was always there with a sarcastic remark, acting like a textbook manipulator. Lu Rian had intended to play the benevolent advisor, but seeing him reject her kindness so bluntly, her expression quickly turned cold. She asked if he was really unable to tell that she was trying to help him. He looked at her with genuine curiosity, wondering what her angle was. He mockingly asked if her job as a restaurant waitress was proving too difficult or if she was regretting her choices and wanted a free dinner again. At the mention of dinner, Lu Rian's face darkened and she fell silent. Working part-time had indeed been far more difficult than she expected. Between her heavy course load and her responsibilities at the student union, she was already exhausted and getting home late every single day. The main issue, of course, was that the meager wages weren't nearly enough to cover her expenses. He had spoiled her for far too long. She was finding that life was far more difficult than she had imagined. Initially, she assumed his behavior was just a rich boy's tantrum. She thought he was just being difficult for a few days, but now she was starting to wonder why he wasn't coming back to chase after her. In the past, no matter how poorly she treated him, he always came back. Seeing her silence now, Xiaoyu decided not to let her off easy. He curled his lips into a smirk, asking if she was still waiting for his anger to fade so he would pathetically return to coax her. He admitted he could understand her struggle. After all, he had once been used to a lavish lifestyle before being kicked out of his home. The memory of being penniless was etched into his mind. If one has always been poor, perhaps the struggle is easier to bear. But once you are accustomed to luxury, returning to a life of poverty is a special kind of agony, a feeling he knew all too well. Back then, he spent every night lying in bed, lost in a fantasy. He would imagine a moment that never actually came. He had hoped Lu Rian would suddenly realize he was innocent, forgive him, and take him back. But reality, as we know, is rarely so kind. He waited and hoped until the day he died, yet she never believed him. Instead, he only watched her marry someone else. He eventually learned the truth of how she framed him. He knew Rian's life couldn't be easy now, regardless of how long he had supported her. He told her quite bluntly that he didn't need her pity. Rian pressed her lips together tightly as he continued his verbal assault. He warned her that if she expected him to come crawling back, she was living in a dream. To be honest, it was a total delusion. He suggested that if she wanted him back, she should try begging. Perhaps then, out of pity, he might throw a little money her way. He spoke these words with a smile, though his heart remained cold. He had no intention of actually forgiving her if she begged. However, he found the idea of seeing the arrogant Lu Rian pleading at his feet quite appealing. She was simply too prideful. She had caused his miserable death in his past life, and he wasn't about to let her off easily in this one. Revenge, after all, is a slow process. He decided it was better to give her a flicker of false hope. Rian told him to keep dreaming, her voice turning icy as she spoke. She refused to look at him again, but he wasn't in a hurry. Once class ended, he made his way directly to the teacher's office. In addition to his class teacher, the dean and 2 other instructors from the same grade were already waiting for him. They prepared a fresh set of questions for him to answer, and once he finished, several teachers gathered to grade the papers together. The results were clear. His performance was genuinely excellent, proving beyond a doubt that his previous exam scores weren't just a fluke. His homeroom teacher looked at him with surprise, admitting he clearly hadn't cheated, though she wondered why his past grades had been so poor. Recalling how he had once lost his head over Lu Rian, he simply explained that he used to be immature and never took his studies seriously. He claimed his family had recently hired a new tutor, and the results, as we can see, were quite remarkable. He noted how precious school days are, being one of the few places where things are relatively fair and effort actually leads to rewards. Once you leave school, he mused, you realize just how cruel society can be. A little later, he returned to the classroom with the faculty. The homeroom teacher and the dean announced the results together, confirming he hadn't cheated. Naturally, Wang Yan's face was a mask of panic. She couldn't believe it. How could he not have cheated? The teacher's expression remained cold as she addressed the class's toxic atmosphere. She reminded them that classmates should help one another, yet their baseless accusations against a student who improved were deeply discouraging. She expressed her hope that everyone would learn from this mistake. To be honest, it was a lesson long overdue for some. He looked at Wang Yan, reminding her of her promise to drop out. He asked if she intended to go back on her word now. He mocked the idea that someone would fail to stand by their own words, suggesting she should avoid making bets in the future. Seeing her friend being cornered, Lu Jingyan stepped in to play the peacemaker, telling Xiaoyu there was no need to be so harsh. She claimed Wang Yan only had his best interests at heart, fearing he had taken a wrong path, and insisted there was no malice intended. She begged him to give her another chance. As soon as Lu Jingyan spoke, the other students chimed in, agreeing that dropping out was too extreme. He curled his lips into a smirk as he looked at those judgmental faces, all of them speaking as if they weren't the ones being wronged. It seemed they were all too eager to give Lu Jingyan face, treating whatever she said as the absolute truth. He turned his gaze toward Lu Jingyan and suggested that if she felt so sorry for her friend, perhaps she should drop out in her place. Lu Jingyan pressed her lips together and stared at him, her eyes quickly filling with tears as if she were the one being bullied. His blunt response caused a stir, leading the others to point fingers at him, arguing that Wang Yan was the only one who offended him, not Lu Jingyan. They asked why he was attacking her, reminding him that Jingyan usually spoke up for him and treated every classmate with the same kindness. Seeing everyone turn against him, he simply curled his lip into a smirk, doubting whether her equal treatment was truly as noble as it seemed. He asked if she would have spoken up for him if he were the one being expelled. She quickly insisted that of course, she would have helped him. She claimed she had always told the other students to be nicer to him. Honestly, he found her saint-like act increasingly difficult to stomach. Turning back to Wang Yan, he told her that if she didn't want to drop out, fine. It just proved she was someone with absolutely no integrity. He offered an alternative. If she wouldn't leave, how about running 20 kilometers instead? Wang Yan stared at him, convinced he was purely malicious. 20 kilometers? To her, that felt like a death sentence given her lack of athletic talent. He told her if she couldn't do it, she should just quit school. He let out a cold snort and sat down. To be fair, whether Wang Yan stayed or left didn't actually change his life much. However, he knew that without a punishment, everyone would think they could walk all over him. She had to pay some kind of price. Wang Yan finally agreed to the run. He added a condition. While running, she had to shout an apology at the top of her lungs. She had to admit she falsely accused him and that he hadn't cheated, ensuring everyone knew what she had done. She asked if he was being too cruel. She worried about losing face in front of the entire school, but he countered that compared to what she tried to do to him, he was being quite merciful. After class, Wang Yan began her 20-kilometer ordeal to trade for her spot in school. She really had no other choice at this point. And he didn't just leave her to it. He sat on the nearby steps to watch her, not intending to let her skip even a single lap. Her stamina was nothing like Lu Rian's. She ran slowly, and having to shout while running meant she was soon on the verge of collapsing. Lu Jingyan approached him then, pleading for Xiaoyu to let it go, claiming that Wang Yan had already realized her mistake. She argued that Wang Yan wasn't athletic and that finishing the distance might actually kill her. He asked if that meant his life mattered less. He asked if it would have been fine if their rumors had driven him to the edge instead. She simply replied that he was perfectly fine now. She claimed he wasn't the type to do something drastic. He shifted his gaze to Lu Jingyan's face as the afternoon light hit her. As she stood against the light, her face was cast in shadow, giving her a somewhat superior and untouchable appearance that triggered a dark memory. He remembered how, before his tragic death in his past life, Lu Jingyan had specifically called him just to mock his desperate actions regarding Lu Rian. We don't know if Jingyan was directly involved in the plot, but he certainly knew everything. They had worked together to destroy him back then. And yet, here she was, calling him excessive. The sheer nerve of it was staggering. He wondered how long she intended to maintain this harmless persona. He asked if she truly expected him to be like the other students, blindly following her lead and pampering her every whim. To be honest, those days were over. He told her that if she was so dissatisfied, she could go run for Wang Yan herself instead of standing there making empty, sarcastic remarks. Seeing Jingyan under attack, Lu Rian stepped forward, warning Zhang Xiaoyu not to go too far since Jingyan was only trying to be helpful. She claimed they were only worried he wouldn't be able to handle the consequences if something went wrong. He looked up, amused by this attempt at heroism. He noted that it was Jingyan who had provoked him first, and suggested that if he didn't want to be insulted, he should simply stay far away. He reminded Rian that all the gifts she gave Jingyan were bought with his money. Did she really think he liked her for her poverty and her drug addict father? Jingyan only knew that Rian's father was a driver. He had no idea about the drug addiction. Naturally, this revelation gave him pause. He glanced at Rian and saw her face turn pale with embarrassment, but he was too preoccupied with his own image to worry about her feelings. Turning back to Xiaoyu, he asked if all this hatred and the targeting of his friends was simply because of his relationship with Lu Rian. He suggested that if Xiaoyu felt he had stolen her, he would simply give her back. Rian panicked, pleading with him not to say such things. Xiaoyu cut them off, telling him to keep her for himself. His home, he noted dryly, was not a recycling center for trash. Before Rian could speak, Xiaoyu continued, addressing the accusation that he was bullying Wang Yan. It was a rather bold claim, all things considered. He pointed out that the entire school knew she was the one who bullied him. In his eyes, he was being incredibly magnanimous right now. If she didn't want to run, she could drop out. He wasn't stopping her. He admitted that he used to care about being seen as a good person. He had tried not to bully anyone, only to end up as the victim. In this new life, however, he only cared about living comfortably on his own terms. He no longer cared what others thought of him. Seeing that he was beyond their control, Lu Rian turned back to Lu Jingyan with a sigh. Rian told Jingyan that they shouldn't worry about someone like that, claiming that if anything happened to Wang Yan, Xiaoyu would regret it soon enough. She urged him to leave, pulling Lu Jingyan away as they walked past Zhang Xiaoyu. Meanwhile, Wang Yan's lack of stamina finally caught up with her. After running 10 kilometers, she collapsed, prompting Rian and Jingyan to call for help and have her rushed to the hospital. Naturally, Xiaoyu followed them there. At the hospital, Rian gloated, asking if he was happy now that this had happened. To be honest, he was perfectly fine with the situation. He saw no reason to be upset. Instead, he picked up his phone and called the hospital director to ensure the best doctors were assigned to the case. He then covered all the medical expenses himself. Originally, Rian and Jingyan had hoped to use Wang Yan's collapse as leverage against him. But with the bills paid and the best care provided, they were left speechless. Later, we see Jingyan waiting in the room as Wang Yan finally woke up. He asked if she was all right, gently patting her shoulder with a tenderness that seemed almost performative. It was a touching scene in its own way. When he asked how she felt, Wang Yan began to play the victim, claiming that she felt uncomfortable all over. She was quite the actress. Xiaoyu, however, was just standing there casually drinking a carton of milk. He noted that the specialists had already finished their examination. He informed her that she was perfectly healthy, just out of shape, and suggested she exercise more, starting with the remaining 10 kilometers tomorrow. Wang Yan stared at him in disbelief. She had actually fainted, yet he was still fixated on making her finish the run. It seemed almost cruel. She asked if he was trying to drive her to her death. He simply told her to relax, as he had no intention of letting that happen. He assured her that if she fainted again, the entire hospital staff would be at her service. Seeing her face turn red with anger, he just smiled. He raised an eyebrow and asked if she was planning to back out, suggesting that if she couldn't handle it, she could always just drop out. She told him he was going too far, but he simply mentioned that he knew both of her parents worked at the Jingtian group. Hearing him bring up her family's private business, Wang Yan's eyes widened in shock. She demanded to know if he had been investigating her. He didn't deny it, simply asking, "What if I have?" Cornered and with her fists clenched, she finally relented, promising to finish the run tomorrow. He told her he was glad to hear it. Since the medical bills were already settled, he reminded her that as long as those kilometers remained, Even if she were on the brink of death, he would have the doctors bring her back to finish. With that, he walked out, leaving Ruyan staring after him. As he watched Xiaoyu leave with that cold expression, Jingyan's brow furrowed in concern. Wang Yan, however, was perfectly fine. After some rest and in 4-drip, Jingyan and Ruyan finally headed home. But Xiaoyu wasn't finished for the day. Once home, he took photos of the medical bills and the hospital's official diagnosis and posted them directly into the class group chat. Having seen far too many people faking injuries for sympathy, he wasn't about to leave any room for leverage. Only after handling all of that did he finally lie down to rest. The next day, we see that Wang Yan obediently went out to finish her 10-kilometer run. After this little ordeal, she didn't dare act as arrogant as she had before. Deep down, she was terrified of what else he might know. Even if she was simmering with resentment, she only dared to grumble behind his back, never again trying to boss him around to his face. The rest of the students also began to treat him with a new sense of caution. They had all seen exactly what happened to those who crossed him. It helped, of course, that he was incredibly wealthy, so wealthy that if you offended him, he'd pay your medical bills just to keep you running. No one called him a lapdog anymore. They stopped mocking his grades as well, but instead, they began whispering behind his back about his supposed relationship with an older woman. The rumors even reached the school forum, and someone, whoever they were, had even posted his photo along with the gossip. To be honest, it was quite a mess. By the time he saw it, the thread was already filled with replies. It seemed they didn't dare target him in person, so they retreated to the safety of the internet. After all, it's much easier to be brave when you're hiding behind an anonymous username. On Monday afternoon, as Xiaoyu was leaving school, he noticed 2 rather beautiful young women standing at the gate. Judging by their uniforms, they were likely from the prestigious First High School. People were whispering about how pretty they were, identifying one as Lan Yingying from the First High Tennis Club. Previously, Xiaoyu's world had revolved entirely around Ruyan, so he had never really paid attention to anyone else. He had heard the name Lan Yingying before, but he couldn't quite put a face to it until now. Taking a proper look at her, he noted she had a great athletic build, but in his eyes, she was still a far cry from the beauty of Bai Ningbing. He couldn't help but wonder how he had been so blind in his past life to ever reject Ningbing. Now, looking back at her, he realized that she was truly in a league of her own, standing out no matter who she was compared to. His driver was already waiting at the gate, but as he prepared to get into the car, Yingying stepped forward to block his path. She stared at him with a look of pure curiosity and asked if he was Jiang Xiaoyu. He simply looked at her and asked who she was, noting that they didn't exactly have a history together. At that, Yingying gave a faint, knowing smile. She curled her lips into a smirk, mentioning that the school forums were buzzing with news about him, rumors that had even reached her school. People were saying he wasn't someone to be trifled with, and the story of how he disciplined Wang Yan had been told with quite a bit of dramatic flair. Xiaoyu found the whole thing rather amusing and didn't get angry. He calmly looked at her and asked if her name was Lan Yingying. Yingying was visibly startled, staring at him as she wondered how he knew her. She even joked that he hadn't fallen for her, surely. She claimed she wasn't the type to just go out for dinner, clutching her chest as if his merely knowing her name was some sort of unwanted advance. Xiaoyu looked at her narcissistic display and couldn't help but find it ridiculous. He dryly asked if her family was too poor to afford a mirror, offering to give her some money to buy one and take a good look at herself. The idea that he would be interested in her was, in his view, quite a stretch. After saying his piece, he simply turned and walked away. Lan Yingying felt her pride take a hit from such a blunt insult, shouting after him about how rude he was being, insisting she was actually quite pretty. He ignored her completely and got into his car. Left behind, Yingying's smirk returned. She noted his name was Jiang Xiaoyu and vowed to remember this. Imagine her surprise at being called ugly. Meanwhile, when Xiaoyu arrived home, we see that Bai Ningbing had finally returned. He had disappeared for several days, and now that he was back, Xiaoyu found himself feeling unexpectedly warm toward him. Asking if he had finished his business, Xiaoyu caught a glimpse of him and realized, once again, just how handsome Ningbing truly was. He admitted he thought Ningbing had found tutoring him too tedious to continue. He'd even tried other teachers, but none were as efficient. Ningbing quietly explained that he hadn't quit, he had just been a bit overwhelmed with personal matters lately. Xiaoyu told him there was no need for explanations. He was just happy Ningbing was back to help him with his studies. He encouraged Ningbing to handle his own affairs whenever needed. After all, in his past life, Ningbing had looked out for him until the very end. Compared to how poorly he had treated Ningbing back then, a few days of absence was nothing worth mentioning at all. Ningbing gave a small nod of agreement, suggesting they get to work, and the two of them headed into the study together. Having missed several days of lessons, Xiaoyu had a pile of questions ready, and Ningbing sat quietly by his side as he worked. He had naturally seen the news online and was initially quite worried, wondering if Xiaoyu would be heartbroken over the rumors. However, seeing Xiaoyu in such good spirits, he decided to keep his concerns to himself. Just then, Bai Ningbing's phone buzzed with a message. He flipped open his phone and glanced at the screen. It was a message from Lan Yingying. It seemed she was still reaching out to him. Even though Ningbing had already given Xiaoyu his word, Xiaoyu still worried he might change his mind. After all, Ningbing was known for being a bit unpredictable. Ningbing simply replied with a short message before turning to Xiaoyu, mentioning he had to visit Xiaoyu's school later that week. Xiaoyu looked at him with surprise, asking what business he had there. It turned out there was a tennis match being held at the 8th middle school gym. Xiaoyu immediately offered to go and cheer for him. Hearing this, Ningbing gave a small, quiet nod of approval. He recalled how, in the past, every time he saw Xiaoyu, the boy was always trailing behind Lu Rian, his eyes fixed only on her. It was as if Xiaoyu couldn't see anyone else. Perhaps he had never even noticed Ningbing at all. But now, hearing that Xiaoyu wanted to cheer for him, a faint, almost imperceptible trace of joy touched the corners of Ningbing's mouth. The match was set for Thursday afternoon. Even before it began, the school was already buzzing with excitement. Students were whispering about the high level of the girls' tennis team. Some mentioned that Lan Yingying had visited the school and was incredibly beautiful, though others were quick to disagree. They argued she couldn't compare to Lu Ruyan, who was the total package, excellent grades, a great tennis player, and stunningly pretty. Naturally, Ruyan had a massive following at school. Meanwhile, Lu Jingyan had been in a foul mood for the past few days, feeling quite restless. The revelation Xiaoyu made about Ruyan's father being an addict weighed heavily on her mind. She knew exactly how destructive that could be. Xiaoyu looked at his own reflection. In the past, if Ruyan had a match, he would have been the first one there, organizing a cheering squad for her. Looking back now, such behavior seemed utterly ridiculous to him. Because of the rumors about him and an older woman, the others ignored him. While everyone else was busy cheering for Ruyan, some students began discussing whether Bai Ningbing from the first middle school would show up. Ningbing was, after all, the only student whose exam scores consistently ranked higher than Lu Ruyan's own impressive marks. His name had left a deep impression on everyone. Most assumed he wouldn't come, given his reputation for being quite distant. He rarely participated in competitions, so catching a glimpse of him was considered a rare event indeed. As we see the others discussing Bai Ningbing, Lu Ruyan's expression darkens, her discomfort plain for all to see. Her gaze slowly drifts towards Xiaoyu, and seeing him buried in his books, she feels a flicker of irritation. She wonders if he truly has no intention of cheering for her, finally asking if his constant studying is even meaningful. Xiaoyu, noticing her sudden interest in his affairs, simply curls his lip into a small smile and says it certainly is. He explains that since he isn't naturally gifted like her, he must work harder, asking if she simply can't stand his progress. He jokes that since he is already wealthy and handsome, if his grades beat hers and Lu Jingyan's, they'd have nothing left. Ruyan lets out a soft laugh at this, admitting that while Xiaoyu has improved, he has only just cracked the top 200. She warns him that the competition only gets fiercer from here, and he might very well drop back down next time. The idea of him actually surpassing her seems like a fantasy. To her, his current rank is already a minor miracle. She accepts that Ningbing can beat her due to sheer natural talent, a mind she truly cannot fathom, but not Xiaoyu. She believes no amount of effort can bridge the gap of their years of accumulated study, but Xiaoyu remains calm. He simply remarks that the future is unpredictable, while she, losing interest, stands up to prepare for her match. As she leaves the classroom, we see Lu Jingyan sitting nearby, having overheard the entire exchange. Her fingers tighten instinctively, yet she manages to keep her composure as she approaches Xiaoyu with a question. She asks if he wants to join them in cheering for Ruyan, a generous offer, or so it would seem on the surface. Ever since Xiaoyu cut ties, the flow of gifts to Ruyan has stopped, and Jingyan has felt the loss personally. She feels it is essential to pull him back into their circle. They simply cannot afford to be strangers. If Xiaoyu continues to pine for Ruyan, he will continue to spend money on her, keeping their lifestyles comfortable. Currently, Ruyan is exhausted by part-time work, barely earning enough to support herself, let alone their previous habits. Every day, he has to escort her home, living a life that is worlds apart from the days when Xiaoyu supported her. When Xiaoyu hears Jingyan's suggestion, he refuses immediately, asking why he should bother going at all. Jingyan insists that Ruyan is actually quite good to him, claiming she often speaks well of him behind his back. She argues there's no need to be so stiff, but Xiaoyu just looks at her, remembering his past life's mistakes. Back then, to marry Ruyan, he handed over his family business, while Jingyan constantly whispered sweet lies in his ear. She had acted so magnanimous, pretending she didn't care if Xiaoyu competed with her for Ruyan's affections. He used to think Jingyan was a good person, only to realize later that her indifference was a calculated front. She knew perfectly well that Ruyan loved her and never him. Being with him was merely a way to gain benefits. Now, hearing Jingyan defend Ruyan again, Xiaoyu isn't buying it for a single second, not this time. He coldly remarks that he has standards for his friends, leaving Jingyan stunned as the others watch the awkward exchange. Seeing him disrespect Jingyan, the others chime in, telling her there's no use talking to him if he doesn't want to go. And so, they leave for the gym, where we find Ruyan already changed into her athletic gear for the match. She stands before Jingyan, who watches her with a smile, until her gaze suddenly shifts toward the entrance. Ruyan's eyes land on Xiaoyu, and she notes with some surprise that he actually showed up after saying he wouldn't. Jingyan follows her gaze to find Xiaoyu, who ignores them both and heads straight for the spectator stands. He searches for a good vantage point, eventually finding a seat in the front row to watch the upcoming events. He makes sure to sit far from Jingyan's group, but instead of Ningbing, he spots Lan Yingying approaching him. Ying stops right in front of him, demanding an apology for the way he spoke to her a few days ago. Xiaoyu can't help but let out a cold laugh, asking if she's truly forgotten who started that particular conflict. If she hadn't provoked him first, he wouldn't have scolded her, yet Ying looks at him with genuine confusion. He asks her who else he should scold, considering her habit of spreading rumors about boys, which, naturally, is a rather unpleasant trait. When he points out that people also say she is a lesbian, Ying becomes instantly alert, demanding to know who said such a thing. Seeing that she actually believes the bait, Xiaoyu can't help but let out a small laugh at her sudden, genuine concern. Ying watches him with a curious gaze, refusing to drop the subject as she asks if he inquired about her name last time because of her.